Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the June 2022 Ordinary Council meeting. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their elders past and present. I would like to advise everyone that the audio of this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. We're aware that the TV on the right-hand side of the chamber is currently not working. The City is in the process of working on a solution to fix this. The City apologises to those in the public gallery this evening for any inconvenience that may cause. I request everyone to please turn off your mobile phones. I remind you that any recording of the meeting proceedings and photography within the chamber is prohibited unless prior approval has been granted, and councillors and city officers are reminded to disclose any declarations of financial interests and interests affecting impartiality, and are requested to activate their microphones when addressing the meeting. So, with that, welcome. Item 1 is the declaration of opening, and I declare this meeting open at 1 minute past 6 p.m. Item 2 is a disclaimer, and the City of South Perth disclaims any liability for any loss arising from any person or body relying on any statement, discussion, recommendation or decision made during this meeting. Item 3 is announcements from the presiding member, that's me, and there's no such announcements tonight. Item 4 is attendance. Item 4.1 is apologies, and we have no apologies this evening. And item 4.2 is approved leaves of absence, and there's no such leaves of absence tonight. Item 5 is declarations of interest, and we've got 3 that I've received so far. The first is from Councillor Jennifer Navard, and impartiality interest has been declared in respect of item 10.3.1 as my partner has a financial relationship with GHD. I've received an impartiality interest from CEO Mike Bradford in item 10.5.1 as this item relates to my contract of employment. And I've also received a financial interest declaration from CEO Mike Bradford on item 10.5.2 as this item relates to my contract of employment. Councillors, does anyone else have any interest that they wish to declare this evening? And that's a no. Okay. Item 6 is public question time. Item 6.1 is responses to previous public questions taken on notice. That's nil. And item 6.2 is public question time itself. But before I open public question time, I am conscious that we've got 13 sets of public questions this evening, and I do notice that some of the preambles we've been provided with are quite lengthy. So I'm going to ask everyone to please be respectful of everyone's time. Please keep the preambles to a minimum. Public question time is for public questions. It's not for deputations with a question mark placed on the end of it. So with that, I'd like to invite Mr. Murray Rosenberg of Como, if you'd like to come to the microphone. And welcome, Mr Rosenberg.
Good evening, Mr Mayor and councillors. My questions relate to one of the recommendations made in the Community Recreation Facilities Plan 2019 to 33 that the Council endorsed in July 2019. The plan recommends, quote, that the City develops a master plan for the George Burnett Recreation Precinct to investigate co-location and amalgamation of facilities, not necessarily clubs, to incorporate, quote, the upgrade of George Burnett Pavilion to accommodate the South Perth Rugby League Club, Southern Districts Touch Association, and the South Perth Cricket Club on page 29. Question number 1. Is the City planning to relocate the cricket club from Richardson Reserve to George Burnett Reserve?
Thank you for the question. Ms Lummer?
Thank you, and thank you for the question. No, the City does not have any current plan to relocate the cricket club. Whilst the cricket club is predominantly located at Richardson Park, it also uses other local reserves from time to time, including the synthetic cricket pitch at George Burnett Reserve. Hence, the George Burnett Recreation Precinct Master Plan reference about the cricket club in the City's Community Recreation Facilities Plan.
Thank you. A second question?
What is the City's long-term plan for the public open space at Richardson Reserve?
Thank you. Ms Lummer?
Yes, through the chair. So Richardson Park is Crown land vested for recreational purposes, so the City's long-term plan is for this site to remain as public open space. Part of Richardson Park has long been considered for potential use in association with South Perth train station in the future, but no final decision has been made about this. As long ago as November 2012, Council considered a business case for the development of the station, utilising portions of the park. More recently, Richardson Park is mentioned in the South Perth Activity Centre Plan for further consideration in regard to the station.
Thank you. And your final question, Mr Rosenberg?
Thank you. Who owns the sports pavilion at Richardson Reserve that is used by the Wasp Hockey Club?
Thank you. Ms Lummer?
Thank you. The City of South Perth owns the pavilion.
Thank you. And thank you for your questions, Mr Rosenberg. I'd now like to invite Ms Kay Poe of Como. If you'd like to come to the microphone and please ask your questions.
Good evening, everyone. According to the officer's report, 3 parcels of land in Thelma Street, namely Collier Reserve, Collins Oval, and Bill Graydon Oval, were considered for the proposed Wasp hockey facility. The report also states that Wesley College has a long-term lease on Collins Oval with the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage, and that if the hockey facility is approved, the City would formalise a lease agreement at Collier Reserve with the club under the management of Wesley College. For clarification, and not because I'm advocating for the facility to be built on Collins Oval, I would like to ask the following questions. Was this intending to play hockey across 2 adjoining ovals, Collier Reserve and Collins Oval, but they are proposing to build the facility on Collier Reserve? Why did the club choose Collier Reserve as a preferred site for this facility instead of Collins Oval?
Thank you. Ms Lummer?
Thank you for the question. The question is really for the Wasps Hockey Club. The club is likely to provide information about their preferred site for the hockey facility in its feasibility study report, which has still not been received.
Thank you. A second question?
Sure. Considering how Wesley College will manage this facility and that they already have an existing long-term lease on Collins Oval, why did the City support the club's preference to build the facility on Collier Reserve, that being Crown land and public open space vested to the care and control of the City of South Perth, instead of advising the club to build the facility on Collins Oval?
Thank you. Ms Lummer?
Thank you. So the City's preliminary in-principle support for the club's preference to build on Collier Reserve, as opposed to Bill Graydon or Collins Oval, is largely based on the level of impact to existing sports being played across the 3 sites. Aussie rules football, baseball, cricket and school sports have significantly more sporting use on Bill Graydon Reserve and Collins Oval compared to Collier Reserve. Collier Reserve is mostly used as a secondary sort of backup sporting reserve, largely due to its proximity to the Bill Graydon change rooms. If the proposed hockey facility was built on Collins Oval, it would have a higher impact on the other existing sporting users, baseball and cricket, than if it was built on Collier Reserve.
Thank you, Ms Lummer, and thank you, Ms Poe, for your questions.
Thank you.
I'd now like to invite Ms Kathy Lees of South Perth. If you'd like to come to the microphone, and please feel free to ask your questions.
Good evening. I'm here on behalf of South Perth Tree Canopy Advocates, which is a growing group of local community members who are passionate about trees and all of their many environmental, social and economic benefits. We're keen to work with the city and the community to ensure that the urban forest in the city of South Perth is appropriately protected and expanded to ensure the ongoing livability of our suburbs. And to assist with this work, we have the following questions. Question 1, can you please advise what is the proposed budget allocation for implementation of the city's Urban Forest Strategy 2018 to 2023, particularly in terms of new tree planting and replacement of dead trees, and how has this changed over the last 3 years?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and good evening, Ms Lees. The proposed budget for 22-23 for streetscape maintenance is $2.34 million. Tree planting is contained within that budget. It's intended to plant approximately 600 new trees. There's actually a typo on the answer to this question. It's 600, not 500. Will be planted in the winter planting season at an approximate cost of $150,000. This includes maintenance and tree watering. Previous budgets, the current year's budget was approximately $2 million for the same program. About 450 trees are being planted at present. And that includes, as you say, new planting and replacement of dead trees. So there's been some replacements done already. The 2021 budget allocation was approximately $1.85 million, and the city planted approximately 417 trees that year. The 2019-20 operational budget had an allocation of $2.15 million, and the city planted 1,385 trees. And lastly, the 2018-19 operational budget had an allocation of approximately $2.36 million for streetscapes maintenance, and within that, the city planted approximately 1,500 trees in that year.
Thank you. And your second question, Ms Lees?
Can you please advise what key performance indicators are being used to measure how the city is performing in achieving the outcomes and actions adopted in the city's urban forest strategy? And can this reporting on the KPIs since 2018 be provided to our group?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
The key targets or KPIs are contained within the urban forest strategy, which proposes to maintain and improve the city's tree canopy cover. There's a number of targets within that for the city to meet, and in terms of the reporting on these, the city intends to brief council in the near future about the urban forest, and we can make the KPIs available to your group after that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Taylor, and thank you for your questions, Ms Lees. I'd now like to invite Mr Kenneth John Ashworth of Como, if you'd like to come to the microphone, and please feel free to ask your questions.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and Councillors, the opportunity. Question 1. At the agenda meeting on Tuesday, June the 21st, it was stated that the council only have funds totalling $43 million for the recreation facility, with another $37 million to be found to meet the projected budget of $80 million. Based on a very conservative total cost of $100 million required to complete the project, where does the City of South Perth expect to fund a shortfall of a very conservative $57 million?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and good evening, Mr Ashworth. The RAF is an $80 million ex-GST project. The city is working towards that goal. Of the remaining $37 million, the city has requested $20 million from the state government. The city will also pursue the remaining funding through an operator procurement process and other partnerships, including naming rights.
Thank you. Your second question?
Why is the City of South Perth considering appointing a project manager without the funding to complete the recreation project?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Mr Ashworth, the $20 million of federal government funding is a key part of the funding strategy for the RAF. The appointment of an independent project manager is a necessary requirement to meet milestone 2 of the $20 million funding agreement. Should the city not meet its obligations under this agreement, then this funding is put at risk.
Thank you. And your final question, Mr Ashworth?
Here tonight we have representatives of several golf clubs that play and contribute to the success of Collier Park Golf Course. We have estimated the clubs represented here pay over $200,000 per year in ball fees, and that was a very conservative amount. And over the total life of a golf course, these clubs have contributed $4.5 million in ball fees. Why would the City of Perth want to reduce the playing capacity of competitive golf at Collier Park Golf Course, and also without any consultation with the patrons that use this facility?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Ashworth, the city thanks golf clubs for their patronage of the Collier Park Golf Course. Collier Park is one of the best public golf courses in WA, and we say that with a lot of pride in terms of the way the course is maintained, and the investment in the RAF will ensure its ongoing viability. The RAF will maintain the Collier Park's current capacity for competitive golf, as well as cater for the emerging trends towards alternative format golf, with the addition of short form golf, mini golf, which has already been constructed, and a new technology-based driving range. Oops, there's a bit more. Excuse me, I just turned the page. The city has previously conducted extensive consultation with the golf clubs who use Collier Park, and will continue to do so once funding is secured and the council authorises the city to commence design.
Thank you, Mr Taylor, and thank you, Mr Ashworth, for your questions. I'd now like to invite Mr Peter Leonard Scott of Como, if you'd like to come to the microphone, and we look forward to your questions.
Good evening, Mr Mayor and councillors and employees of the city. I have serious concerns that the continued push to pursue the RAF project in the face of obvious escalations and dubious revenue projections represents reckless financial management and a severe lack of transparency. My first question, at a previous council meeting, I was told by the CEO that the $20 million the council intends to put into the RAF is not budgeted. Does the council propose to borrow the $20 million and pay interest, or will it be siphoned away from planned projects and allocated reserves, or will it be funded by the proposed increase in rates?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and good evening, Mr Scott. A decision has not yet been made about how the city will finance its $20 million contribution. That is obviously a matter for council. For the past 2 years, the city has consistently stated that the RAF will not result in an increase in rates. The city remains committed to that goal and will not be recommending to council to increase rates as part of its funding strategy for the RAF.
Thank you, Mr Taylor. And just before you ask your second question there, Mr Scott, I will ask members of the gallery to please be respectful. Your second question, please, Mr Scott.
Thank you. Question 2. The CEO has consistently advised that he is confident the RAF can be delivered within the $80 million budget, and if necessary, the scale of the project will be cut to fit the budget. Can he advise if there has been any assessment carried out as to the impact on revenue of reduced facilities and a consequential reduction in return on investment?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Scott, the city has already undertaken value engineering of the RAF, so it can be delivered in the $80 million budget and still maintain operational and financial viability. When the total project funding is known, the city will present to council the proposed operational and financial model for the RAF for its approval.
Thank you, Mr Taylor. And just before I ask you to proceed with your third question, Mr Scott, I'm going to move a motion that public question time be extended for a further 15 minutes. So can I have a seconder? Councillor Choi, thank you. All those in favour, well, please raise your hands. We can probably do that without the machine. Yep, that's unanimous. Thank you. Please continue with your third question, Mr Scott.
in answer, I guess a request as a result of that answer is, can we have access to that value engineering or value management detail? Because we haven't seen that.
I think we'll have to take that one on notice, Mr Scott, but I would ask you to proceed with your... Oh, Mr Bradford?
I reckon when we met, I actually briefed you on it, on the details of it, but the detailed information is actually confidential.
We'll take that up later.
Right.
Question 3. I understand the council is in discussion with private investors to seek commitment of funding of up to $20 million. Has the council factored in the investors' expected return on this capital into the RAF business case?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Scott, the city is not yet in discussion with private investors about the RAF. Procurement of private sector investment and other partnerships, such as naming rights, has not yet commenced. Return on capital investment for the RAF operator has been factored into the RAF business case.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your questions, Mr Scott. I'd like to invite Ms Cecilia Brooke of South Perth. I invite you to the microphone. And I do notice you've got a little bit of a lengthy preamble here, so if you're able to cut that down and...
I'll be as quick as I can.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Good evening, Mr Mayor and councillors. I speak on behalf of the City of South Perth Residents Association Incorporated. Preamble. Tonight we sit at the crossroads of the recreation aquatic facility. As the chair of COSPRA, I would emphasise that once again, the city, that COSPRA is, I would emphasise once again that COSPRA is not against a swimming pool. And we've said that many times here in this chamber. Our sole focus over this campaign has been the financial aspect of the project and what it could ultimately do for the City of South Perth finances going into the future. For the last 2 years, my husband and myself, along with...
Ms Brooks, sorry to interrupt, but I do have to be fair to everyone. I know there's an anecdote about your personal building experiences.
Just to explain.
No, I've got to be fair to everyone, Ms Brooke. It can't be a deputation with a question mark on the end.
Well, I'm just going to, can I just say that the quote that we had originally was $53,000. We have to get a new
Ms
builder.
Brooke, deputations were last week. This is public question times. I'm sorry, but I've got to be fair to everyone.
Can I also say, I also recently attended a luncheon, thank you, at the UDIA-WA Industry Luncheon, where the Minister for Housing was a keynote speaker. At that luncheon, one of the developers also told the audience that the increase of the building industry is facing at the moment is 40%. This 40% increase covers labour and materials. Question 1. From the inception of the RAF project, the spoken price was $80 million. I had previously asked if the $80 million still stands and I've been told yes. In view of the increase in construction costs, is the city intending to cut back on the project and build something smaller, or is the path that is going ahead still the same as the original plans?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and good evening, Ms Brooke. The city is continuing to monitor escalation in the WA construction market. The city has already undertaken value engineering of the RAF project to remain within 80 million and will continue to do so throughout the project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Considering that construction, labour and material costs have increased since the RAF project was initiated, does the council have a risk mitigation plan to minimise any losses that this project will incur if it proceeds?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Ms Brooke, yes, the city has retained a reputable quantity surveyor firm, Ryder Lovett Bucknell, to provide advice on construction costs from project inception and has included provision for escalation in the RAF budget.
Thank you. And your final question, Ms Brooke?
As the city today has only $20 million from the former Liberal Party government, which was obtained by the former Minister for Swan, Steve Ines, $20 million to be secured by the South Perth Council, and we don't know to this date where the $20 million is coming from, and $3 million from Curtin University. We are aware the city is in discussions with the state government for a further $20 million. Even if the state government gave this grant, there is still a shortfall of approximately $30 to $40 million, which means that today's prices for the facility would be in the order of $110 to $120 million. Even the city's budget is showing cost overruns on some projects. Can the city please explain where the remaining many millions of dollars are coming from?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Ms Brooke, the RAF is an $80 million project. The city is working towards that goal. Around $43 million has been secured, with the remainder to be met through a combination of state government and private sector investment.
Thank you, Mr Taylor, and thank you, Ms Brooke, for your questions. I'd now like to invite Mr Greg Benjamin of South Perth, if you'd like to come to the microphone, and welcome. And once again, there's a fairly lengthy preamble there, Mr Benjamin, so I would be grateful if you could cut that down and go straight to the questions.
Good evening, everyone. I'll try and do my best. Excuse me. The council minutes, 24th of November 2020, recorded that the RAF business case, as we've said, had a funding package of $80 million, but had an expected annual return on investment of a mere $13,406. It also said a scaled-down version of the RAF based on a reduced funding package might not be capable of being financially self-sustaining. The business case in 2020 is evidently out of date and not reliable for current decision-making. It's understood that at this date, after 2 years, the city only has funding of $43 million, with at least another $37 million to secure, probably much more. Inflation in Perth is currently on average 7.6% and much higher for some other costs. Interest rates are increasing and could go up another 3% in the next 12 months.
All right, Mr Benjamin, I've been lenient, but that's a pretty good preamble. I'll ask you to move to the questions now.
I'd just like to read an important one last statement, please.
Mr Benjamin, I have to be fair to everyone.
It's a very
proceed.
important
Mr.
statement, Mr Mayor.
No, Mr Benjamin, I have to be fair to everyone. Please proceed to your questions.
It's not very fair. What is the current expected total funding package for the RAF project? Could it now be 90 million or 100 million or higher?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and good evening, Mr Benjamin. The RAF is an $80 million project.
Thank you. Second question, Mr Benjamin?
In the interest of accountability and transparency, rather than being hidden behind a veil of so-called confidentiality, please provide a summary of current updated RAF project total expended revenues versus expected costs for each of the core functions.
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Benjamin, a redacted version of the project definition plan for the RAF is available on the city's website. Section 4.5 on page 30 details the anticipated cash flow for the RAF. The detailed financial model demonstrates that the RAF will deliver sufficient return for the operator and the city. Despite the economic uncertainty, the city is confident in these projections. Release of further detailed information would prejudice future negotiations with the RAF operator. The city wants to secure the best deal for the RAF. It is important to note that the risk associated with the operations of the RAF are entirely borne by the operator.
Thank you. And your final question, Mr Benjamin?
What is the current updated annual return on investment for the RAF for each of the three scenarios, low, expected, high? If expected to run at a loss, why is the council breaching the feasibility statements endorsed at its meeting on 24th of November 2020 and proceeding further with proposed project and incurring further costs?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Benjamin, the RAF is not expected to run at a loss. The RAF operational and financial models will be updated once the project funding is confirmed.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr Benjamin, for your questions. Folks, just a gentle reminder, everyone has the ability to make a deputation the week before an ordinary council meeting, and you'll be granted 10 minutes to speak to any item that's on the agenda, but public question time is really for public questions, and I do have to treat everyone fairly and consistently, so I will appreciate it if everyone takes that. I'd now like to invite Ms Margaret Bell of South Perth, if you'd like to come to the microphone, and we look forward to your questions.
Good evening. I'll keep my preamble as short as humanly possible.
Thank you so much.
I'm a regular golfer at Collier Park Golf Course, and I'm the Vice President of the Collier Pines Ladies Club. We're the largest ladies club in the metropolitan area and have played at Collier for over 30 years. We consider this facility to be one of the premier public golf courses in WA. It's very well patronised, and we are really concerned that the City of South Perth is going to downgrade this amenity significantly. As a ratepayer, I'm also concerned about the potential negative financial impact the RAF project will have on the council's viability, given the blowouts in construction costs in WA. My first question, has the council updated their costings and schedule of the RAF to account for the huge increases in costs for labour, materials and delays due to the material shortages we have witnessed over the last 2 years?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and good evening, Ms Bell. The answer is yes.
Good. Second question, Ms Bell?
Look, I'm feeling much better about it now. I understand the council has made a commitment that rates will not be increased as a result of the financial impact of the RAF. We have seen the lack of usage of the mini golf course and understand it is not providing the revenue forecast and seems to be a bit of a failure. This being the case, it would seem that original advice on expected revenue is way off the mark. Given this, has the council reviewed other revenue projections for other parts of the RAF to adjust for over-optimistic estimates?
Thank you, Ms Bell. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Ms Bell, first and foremost, the mini golf is not a bit of a failure. Mini golf is providing a financial return to the city and is not a drain on city finances or resources. Mini golf is the first stage of a larger redevelopment for Collier Park Golf Course, whether it be the RAF or improved golf course facilities, including high-quality food and beverage and other offerings. In many respects, the RAF can be considered a combination of the best aspects of Wembley Golf Course and the Coburn Arc, both highly successful ventures. The city is confident in the RAF operational and financial models. These models have been independently verified by leading national recreation consultant and international financial services company Deloitte and found to be sound.
Thank you, Mr Taylor. And your final question, Ms Bell?
My final question, has the original cost-benefit analysis contained in the business case been updated to reflect the current reality of today's economic environment? And is there any justification for the RAF project to continue in its current form?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Ms Bell, the RAF is a much-needed community resource which will deliver a range of health, economic and social benefits to the community. The $20 million investment by the city in the RAF is much better value for money than investment in standalone assets which are at the end of their life, not fit for purpose or operate at a financial loss.
Thank you, Mr Taylor, and thank you for your questions, Ms Bell. I am conscious that we might outstrip the extended time for public question time with the next person, so I'm going to move once again that we extend public question time by a further 15 minutes. Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. And I guess we are supposed to use the machine, so I'll ask councillors to count their votes, cast their votes accordingly. And that's unanimous. Thank you, councillors. So I'd now like to invite Mr James McKee of Kensington, if you'd like to come to the microphone. And we look forward to your questions.
Good evening, Mr Mayor and councillors. My question is about the RAF. That's my preamble. With respect to commercial confidentiality, would it be possible for the council to outline the reasons why council went against the advice submitted by their professional officers and external consultants and rejected the recommended tender for the engagement of a project manager for the RAF project?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and good evening, Mr McKee. The city is unable to comment on council deliberations or its decisions. It's a matter for council.
Okay, yeah.
Second question, please.
It's a bit disappointing, but anyway. Why has this important consideration decision not being considered at a council meeting before December? Between December 2021 and now, bearing in mind the advice recommendation provided by the council's officers is basically unchanged.
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr McKee, there was no requirement to do so.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr Taylor, and thank you, Mr McKee, for your questions.
Cheers.
I'd now like to invite Ms Sue Doherty of Como. If you'd like to come to the microphone, welcome to you, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors and staff. My question is in relation to the RAF. Work on the proposed recreation and aquatic facility has taken place over a number of years because of a long-held community expectations. The City of South Perth was fortunate to receive $20 million towards this much-needed community facility, where an integrated venue including pools will provide economies of scale in service provision, capital cost and ongoing operational costs. My first question is, one of the key strategies in the city's community strategic plans from both 2017 to 2027 and the more recent one, 2021 to 2031, is to plan for and promote the development of recreational and aquatic facilities to service community needs. If the council chooses to return the federal government the already secured $20 million for the recreation and aquatic facility, please can you explain how the council will be able to successfully achieve this strategy in the community strategic plan?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and good evening, Ms Doherty. The council has not resolved to return the $20 million grant to the federal government. Should the council resolve to do so, the city will seek advice from the council about whether it intends to continue to pursue this strategy.
Thank you. The second question is, in the event the council makes a decision to return the $20 million funding to the federal government, what does this mean for future funding opportunities for the city from state, federal governments and other sources?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Ms Doherty, it's difficult to predict the future actions of current and future governments at the state and federal level. However, governments of any persuasion are always looking for willing project partners with a strong track record of delivering projects. The city would be compromised and unlikely to attract grants of the magnitude required to make significant investment in community infrastructure such as the RAF.
Thank you, Mr Taylor.
And the final question, please can you confirm that the motion to be determined by council tonight, that is appointing a project manager, will not incur any financial cost, whereas not appointing a project manager will lead to financial loss and reputational damage to the council and the City of South Perth?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Ms Doherty, if council resolves to appoint the independent project manager for the RAF, as conditioned in the federal funding agreement, no financial cost will be borne from this appointment unless council approves expenditure on the PM contract. So
Thank you very
project
much.
manager contract. If council resolves to not appoint a project manager, the city will breach a milestone condition of the federal funding agreement. This potentially could lead to financial loss of $20 million and result in reputational damage to the city.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Taylor, and thank you, Ms Doherty, for your questions. I'd now like to invite Ms Lindley Miles of Waterford to the microphone. Welcome, Ms Miles, and just before I ask you to ask your questions, I will just remind everyone in the gallery to please be respectful of those with differing views. And welcome, Ms Miles.
Thank you. Firstly, I would like to thank the City of South Perth, Mayor Milner and councillors for the opportunity to speak tonight. My preamble. The residents and ratepayers of the City of South Perth are entitled to an essential facility provided by most other councils, both city and regional, to ensure the health and well-being of the entire community. This includes newborns, school children, the disabled, the elderly and the general public. An aquatic centre is for everyone, and I would trust that the council can see past selfishness and a lack of compassion for everyone in our community, as has disappointingly been displayed. Question 1. Does the City of South Perth, Mayor Milner and councillors believe that it is acceptable for thousands of school children within its boundaries to effectively waste at least an hour or more of their educational learning time each day being transported to and from an aquatic facility outside their community for swimming lessons, carnivals and training?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and good evening, Ms Miles. The city notes the lack of aquatic facilities in the area and the long-standing advocacy by the community for a pool.
Thank you, Mr Taylor. Ms Miles, your second question?
Question 2. Does the City of South Perth Mayor Milner and councillors believe it is just and reasonable to expect its ratepayers to use an aquatic facility that is funded and maintained by ratepayers from another council when the City of South Perth is considered to be an affluent area?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Ms Miles, the City is not able to comment on the question, but notes that Strategy 1.3.2 of the Strategic Community Plan 2020 to 2030 is to plan for and promote the development of recreation and aquatic facilities to service City of South Perth needs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Taylor. And your final question, Ms
And my
Miles?
final question, does the City of South Perth Mayor Milner and councillors believe that the physical health, mental health and wellbeing, plus community involvement and a sense of belonging is an important factor in all the lives of all its residents and not just those involved in isolated sports?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Ms Miles, the City understands the importance of physical activity, community involvement and impact this has on physical and emotional health. Many of these priorities are reflected in the Strategic Community Plan 2020-2030.
Thank you, Mr Taylor, and thank you, Ms Miles, for your questions. I'd now like to invite Mr Tony Wheeler of Waterford. Invite you to the microphone. Welcome. I do notice there's a bit of a long preamble there again, so if you could please cut that down and get to the questions as soon as you can, greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll cut it down to 3 sentences if that's...
That'd be great, thank you.
Okay. The council has a responsibility to creating facilities that cater for all residents and not just for small groups of specific interests. This current council seems to have a severe aversion to risk. Managing risk does not mean total risk avoidance and doing nothing. Risk management means identifying all risks, taking all reasonable steps to minimise those risks. This process has been done thoroughly in the business case, and this has been externally and independently validated by Deloitte, as confirmed by Mr Taylor earlier. Question 1. When the online survey of residents was conducted to gauge the need and acceptability for the RAF, the report on the stakeholder and community engagement report released in October 2020, that report indicated that 87.2% of respondents would use the proposed RAF, and almost 80% of respondents had used aquatic facilities within the last 12 months. With such unprecedented strong support from residents, why is the council appearing to be so reluctant to progress what is likely to be the most important community facility for the next 30 to 50 years, when the business case has addressed the risk extensively and provided sound risk management strategies that really minimise operational risk on the council?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you again, Mr Mayor, and good evening, Mr Wheeler. The City is unable to comment on deliberations and decisions by the council or of the council.
Thank you. Your second question, Mr Wheeler?
If the councillors this evening decide not to appoint the project manager and miss a critical milestone required to secure the $20 million in funding from the federal government, if that funding is revoked, are councillors concerned that they will not have acted in the best interests of the majority of residents?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Wheeler, that is a matter for the council.
Thank you. Your final question, Mr Wheeler?
Do the councillors think it's reasonable to ask its residents to use aquatic facilities of surrounding local government areas that have been funded by those residents, while the City of South Perth is providing no aquatic facility and limited indoor court facilities for its own residents?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Wheeler, the City has identified the need for recreation aquatic facilities in South Perth and reflected this in Strategy 1.2.3 of the Strategic Community Plan.
Thank you. And thank you for your questions, Mr Wheeler. And I'd now like to invite Mr George Watts of Carrawarra. If you'd like to come to the microphone, welcome to you, and we look forward to your questions. Oh, and just before you do begin, Mr Watts, I do notice that you've got a fairly lengthy preamble there. I'm being fair to everyone. If you could please cut that down and get to the questions as soon as you can.
Yeah, certainly do, Mr Mayor. My name is George Watts and I'm representing my community of Karrawarra, for which there is overwhelming strong support for the RAF project. I've been inundated with community members concerned about the RAF project might not be going ahead. For most, the understanding is that the decision to proceed with the RAF, pending full funding, has been made and the project should be progressing. It is clear that the RAF project is in jeopardy if the council does not support the proposed officer recommendation tonight.
All right, I'm going to have to cut you off there, I'm afraid, Mr Watts. I am sorry, but deputations were last week.
Not a problem, sir. With that in mind, my question is as follows. Assuming that my understanding of the decision is to be made tonight is correct, if council does not support the officer recommendation, would that jeopardise the city's discussion with the state and our ability to secure state funding for the RAF?
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Good evening, Mr Watts. Yes, it would.
And your second question, Mr Watts?
If the RAF does not go ahead, the City of South Perth will need to fund upgrades to both the Collier Park Golf Course Clubhouse, George Burnett Leisure Centre and a pool to achieve the city's community strategic plan. Are there costings for this work at hand? As previously, it was indication that this cost would be far greater than the RAF is estimated to be to the City of South Perth.
Thank you. Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Watts, I realise your original question was similar to one that's already been asked tonight. I'll take that one on notice.
Okay, sorry, I missed a similar question, sorry.
And your final question, Mr Watts?
So given approving the motion retains $20 million of funding, allows the city to continue to attempt to attain the state funding needed, with the end result being a facility that is forecast to be a cheaper alternative to individual separate facilities, both to build and operate, and the project has overwhelming majority support of residents of the City of South Perth, can it please be explained how it would be possible not to approve the motion and still be considered both fiscally prudent and representing the views of the City of South Perth community who elect the council members to do just that?
I'm not sure that question was on the list, Mr Watts, but that is a matter for council, and if you, stay tuned. We're about to debate it. And thank you for your questions. All right, so that was the end of the questions I've been given notice of. I'm just going to ask the governance team whether there's any late questions in the tray, and there's not. Okay, well, in that case, I close public question time at 6:46 p.m. That takes us to item 7 of the agenda, which is confirmation of minutes and notes. Item 7.1 is minutes, and item 7.1.1 is the ordinary council meeting held on 24 May 2022. I'm looking for a mover that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held 24 May 2022 be taken as read, and confirmed as a true and correct record. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Brenda Abrandis, thank you. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Russell, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes. And that was unanimous, thank you. That takes us to item 7.2, which is notes of briefing. I'm going to call for someone to move that council notes the following council briefings and workshops were held. 7.2.1, council agenda briefing, 21 June 2022, and 7.2.2, concept briefings and workshops. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Russell, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Manolis, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes. And that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. That brings us to item 8, which is presentations. Item 8.1 is petitions, of which there is nil this evening. Item 8.2 is gifts and awards presented to council, of which there is nil this evening. Item 8.3 is deputations, and deputations were heard at the council agenda briefing held 21 June 2022. That brings us to item 9, which is the method of dealing with agenda business. And I wish to advise that the following agenda item is a new report and was not presented to the council agenda briefing held 21 June 2022. And that's item 10.5.2, CEO's performance review process and KPI setting. I'll now seek confirmation from the Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Mike Bradford, that all the report items contained in tonight's agenda, with the exception of item 10.5.2, were discussed at the June Council agenda briefing.
That is correct, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. So, with the exception of those items to be withdrawn for discussion, reports will be adopted by exception resolution. And by this, I mean the officer recommendation will be adopted as is, without discussion or amendment. The following items have been withdrawn. Item 10.4.3, adoption of the annual budget 2022-2023. The reason for that is an absolute majority is required. Also that Councillor Stephen Russell has an amended motion, and also that Councillor Andre Brender-Abrandis has an amended motion. There's also 10.5.2, which is CEO's performance review process and KPI setting. The reason for that is an absolute majority is required for recommendation 1, and CEO Mike Bradford has a financial interest. Councillors, item 10.3.1, which is 10-9 of 2021, provision of recreation and aquatic facility project management, City of South Perth, and item 10.3.2, proposed modification to condition of planning approval, lots 26 and 25, numbers 15 and 17 Redmond Street, Salter Point, were the subject of deputations at last week's agenda briefing. Does anyone wish to withdraw this item for discussion or any other items for discussion? Councillor Russell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I wish to withdraw items 10.3.2 and 10.3.1 as they were subjected to a deputation that spoke against the officer's recommendation.
So it's 10.3.1, which is the RAF, I believe, yes, and 10.3.2, which is the proposed modification to condition of planning approvals, lot 26 and 25, numbers 15 and 17 Redmond Street, Salter Point. They're the ones you wish to withdraw? Thank you. Okay. In that case, are there any others to be withdrawn tonight, councillors? No. Okay. In that case, I'm going to call for a mover and a seconder to carry the following items by exception resolution. The first is item 10.4.1, listing of payments May 2022. 10.4.2, monthly financial statements, May 2022. 10.4.4, policy P667, elected member entitlements. 10.5.1, Chief Executive Officer Key Performance Indicator Report. 10.5.3, Audit Register Progress Report. 10.5.4, Bushfire Risk Management Plan 2022 to 2027. And 10.5.5, Annual Policy Review. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Brender-Abrandis, thank you. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Russell, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes. And that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. So, these items have just been passed by exception resolution in accordance with clause 5.5 of the City of South Perth Standing Orders, Local Law 2007, and the officer's recommendations have been accepted by council. We'll now be moving on to those reports identified to be withdrawn for discussion. So the first item to be withdrawn for discussion this evening is item 10.3.1, that is 10-9 of 2021, provision of recreation and aquatic facility project management, City of South Perth. We do have an officer recommendation before us, and I will move that officer recommendation. I'm happy to do that. Is there a seconder, please? Councillor Russell, thank you. All right, so, councillors, I'm going to speak plainly on this issue, and I'm doing so because I'm a bit concerned that council is in danger of making a mistake on what is really a very simple decision. I was hoping this item was going to go through en bloc, but in my view, there is no reason whatsoever to vote no on this item. Let's take a moment to compare the pair, to look at the risks of a yes vote and to look at the risks of a no vote. A yes vote does not commit the city to any additional expenditure. A yes vote does not expose the city to any additional risk. Paragraph 5 of the officer recommendation expressly states that no expenditure will be incurred on this contract without prior council endorsement for the RAF project to proceed to the next phase. And you've all heard CEO Mike Bradford expressly confirm that in the chamber last week. I repeat, a yes vote does not expose the city to any additional risk or any additional expenditure. By contrast, a no vote gains the city nothing, and it exposes us to enormous risk. I've got limited time, so the following breakdown shouldn't be taken as being exhaustive. It's just a summary of what I think are the biggest risks associated with a no vote. Firstly, a no vote means that we will be knowingly, willfully and deliberately breaching a condition of the $20 million grant funding agreement from the federal government. There's a high likelihood that this will result in the federal government terminating the funding agreement and the city being required to repay the $5.5 million we've already received. Based on last week's discussion, it's possible, although I hope unlikely, that we might be required to pay interest on that amount. Secondly, a no vote is tantamount to killing the RAF project before we've even received a response from the state government to the city's funding proposal for the RAF. Councillors, why would we do that? Why wouldn't we at least keep our options open until we've heard back from the state government? Voting no on this item will likely kill the RAF project before council has the benefit of even knowing what the RAF project budget might have been. To me, that doesn't make any sense. Thirdly, a no vote sends a terrible signal to a wide range of stakeholders, including but not limited to the federal government, the state government, but perhaps most importantly of all, the community that we serve. We've got a simple choice in front of us. We can accept the advice of the city administration and keep moving forward with the RAF project with no additional expense or risk whatsoever incurred by tonight's decision. Or we can deliberately breach the federal funding agreement and effectively kill the RAF project despite not knowing what the state government might have been willing to contribute and despite not knowing what we might or might not have otherwise been able to deliver for our community. Councillors, if we vote no in these circumstances, what effect do we think that decision will have on the city's ability to obtain significant state or federal funding grants for our community in the future? Will our community be satisfied that we've made a reasonable decision? A number of questions last week suggested, at least to me, that some people might be conflating the specific issue of the appointment of a project manager with the broader issue of the viability of the RAF project as a whole. And just in case anyone's under that misapprehension, please let me be clear. This is not a vote on the RAF project as a whole. We don't yet have the information needed to make that decision. In particular, we are still waiting on a response from the state government to the city's funding proposal. I can absolutely understand people questioning whether the RAF business case prepared in 2020 is still valid, given the recent escalation and inflation in building costs. But with respect, that is a separate question, a different question to the question in front of us right now. We will consider what is possible when we know what the project budget is. We will consider the overall financial viability of the project at that time. But the decision before us tonight is a different and a separate issue. The only decision before us tonight is whether we appoint a project manager, which is a specific condition of the $20 million funding agreement from the federal government. I urge you all, please don't conflate the issues before us tonight. A yes vote tonight doesn't commit us to anything other than identifying which project manager we're going to use. A no vote tonight would deliberately and willfully breach that condition of the federal government funding agreement. I've just realised it's 5 minutes. Would someone be kind enough to move a motion? Thank you, Councillor Cridland, seconded by Councillor Sullivan. Thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes as to whether I get another 5 minutes. Thank you, and that was unanimous, and thank you, councillors, for your indulgence. I appreciate it. I'll skip to my conclusion. I've made my point. Councillors, we're very often asked to make decisions where there really are reasonable arguments on both sides and where the decision could understandably go either way. I don't think this is one of those times. There's only one choice before us, in my opinion at least, that represents good governance. That choice doesn't commit us to any additional expenditure. That choice doesn't expose us to any additional risk. That choice allows us to keep our options open for now and make a decision on the RAF project when we have better information. Councillors, that choice is to support the officer recommendation. I commend the officer recommendation to you and I ask you to please support it. Thank you. And with that, Councillor Russell, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, look, it is unfortunate that this item, which is really nothing more than the approval for a tender to support the RAF, has become a proxy motion for the approval or otherwise of the RAF as an ongoing project. We, and I dare say the community, all know the reason why this is so, in that the refusal or deferral of appointing a project management service would invalidate a milestone of the federal grant agreement and therefore placing this grant at risk. This now leaves this council in an environment where decision-making should not ought to be in. That is, we are in effect deciding the future of the RAF rather than deciding on the merits of a tender. Notwithstanding this, I wish to speak on the two matters. The first matter is in regard to the tender appraisal itself. I viewed the tender appraisal and can see that due process has been followed and that the city has recommended a contender that meets the required expertise and value for money. I can see no reason why council should differ from this recommendation. The second matter, the difficult matter, is in regard to this item being a proxy motion for the RAF and therefore requires us to step back and give this item the due consideration and level-headedness it deserves. For me, the only points when a consequential decision on the RAF's future can be made are the final investment decision or the state government's financial commitment. For the former decision point, the council would be in receipt of at least a well-defined pre-FID design, a more firmed-up business case which includes firmed-up funding and a draft operator contract, which would all provide the necessary information for council to make an informed and measured decision. A decision that is necessary to settle the question if the RAF is feasible. The community at least deserves this question to be settled and concluded rather than a what-if question lingering forevermore if FID was not reached. Now, it is true that the city needs to spend money to meet this FID, but this is the reality to what significant project delivery is all about. For the latter decision point, I was bitterly disappointed that the state government did not include provision within the financial year 22-23 budget for a grant towards the RAF. I shouldn't have to state the obvious, but the RAF offers so much more than the Wacker Aquatic Centre, but yet the RAF did not receive a Guernsey. I remain dumbfounded as to why not. Now, I would find it unreasonable to allow the RAF project to continue in limbo if the state government were not to include a grant provision within a suitable time frame of this project. For me, at least some form of commitment or acknowledgement within the financial year 23-24 is necessary to allow the project to proceed to FID. Hence, with this in mind, I ask this council not to jeopardise the RAF project by voting against this item. To do so, in my opinion, would not meet the expectations of the community, as it would be seen to be done in a covert or clandestine manner. If an elected member wishes for the RAF project to be terminated henceforth, then they need to do so in the cold, hard light of public opinion by raising a notice of motion with their arguments. This would be the most appropriate and indeed, in my opinion, the most honourable manner for this to occur. I commend this motion to the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the officer recommendation? No. Councillor D'Souza.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We are being asked to approve a tender for a project manager when we are uncertain if we have a project at all. The August 2021 meeting of council approved a continuation of the project, contingent on a report being presented back in the December 2021 meeting, which would note the progress of securing further funding. There has been no concrete progress made. For all the notion that there are promising talks which are ongoing, these have been going on for the past 3 to 4 years. It seems curious then to continue expending vast sums of ratepayer funds on something that is far from a done deal. This has been going on for more than 3 years and the funding gap remains just shy of $40 million. The question tonight is how much longer can we afford to keep stringing on this project on the hope that more money will appear? We can't keep repeating the mantra, this project is financially viable, when COVID and the inflation crisis has put a dent in even the best laid plans and forecasts. Earlier in the piece, much was made of Sports West being a funding partner, and how Sports West was the key to unlocking future funding sources. With Sports West now out of the picture, which they found a new home, their new HQ in Floreat, they were formerly hailed as a key funding partner, but when they walked away, no one was really worried. The RAF was still full steam ahead. I fear this is an issue Council has not spent much time scrutinising. The withdrawal of a potential key funding partner in Sports West indicates, from my view, the horse has bolted. Compared to last year, the project has taken a backward step. Until we have more certainty, Council should reject the tender because if not, we risk losing control of the project, especially if the risk appears that the RAF operator is appointed before a formal state agreement. Councillors, it's so important to let emotion cloud our judgment on this call. There seems to be a perception that appointing the project manager will be the magic bullet that cures everything and will cure all that ails the RAF. There's also a perception of this being a nil-risk move. Almost nothing in life is nil-risk, least of all a behemoth mega project like this. It's one of the biggest risks Council will face, and Council has to be comfortable with that level of risk. It's also a misconception, in my view, that this will be an $80 million project on the dot. It'll really likely be $100 million plus. And this is not a critique of anyone or anything. This is just the reality of what's happening to all major state infrastructure projects, big and small, across the state, across Australia, and across many Western nations and across the world. Can anyone really stand here, hand on heart, and say this will come in at exactly $80 million? Big projects do blow out, and the question tonight is, who will be on the hook? It's a serious question for the community to ponder. When this project inevitably blows out and the cost escalates, once the contracts are signed, who will be liable for the extra 10 million, the extra 20 million, the extra 30 or $40 million in costs? The answer is the ratepayer, because it's a city asset. Ratepayers are propping up and subsidising something that benefits numerous private parties like Curtin. There is a risk that your rates will pay for blowouts. Council has spent over $1.44 million to date of city funds, not of the federal funds, not of the assigned $20 million council funds, but of municipal funds on this project to date. Over $1.4 million spent, and we're not one step closer to state funding. $1.4 million spent, and we haven't even done concept design.
Councillor D'Souza, I've been lenient here, but you do seem to be talking about the RAF project as a whole rather than the decision that's actually before us. I will ask that you make sure that your comments are relevant to the decision before us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just commenting because the project tender is for the project management of the RAF. So I do believe my comments do relate to that. How much more will Council need to spend before a single shovel is on site and before a single sod is turned? How much more time is Council willing to wait? My concern is that this figure we've spent so far doesn't even consider the internal city time and resources that have been, which might have gone to
Councillor
other
D'Souza,
projects.
I'm sorry, but same issue. You're speaking to the RAF project as a whole. You've got to keep your comments relevant to the decision that's actually before us.
Mr. Mayor, I'm just trying to put on record my concerns and views because I know there's been concern in the community as to what councillors are thinking and what they are believing. So I'm just trying to clear up for the public record.
I appreciate that, but I've got to be fair to everyone. The comments have to be relevant to the decision at hand.
Councillors, this deal is a good deal for all parties.
Sorry to interrupt, that is 5 minutes. I'll move a motion that you get another 5 minutes to speak, seconded by Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes. Thank you. You've got another 5 minutes to speak, Councillor D'Souza.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I thank Council for their indulgence. Councillors, we are not in 2018 or 2019 anymore. The economic environment today is markedly different than what we have faced in the past. We're in the midst of a cost of living crisis, supply chain and energy disruptions, interest rates on the rise, material costs up, labour costs up, construction companies going into liquidation. And we need to make a decision tonight in line with the Mayor's guidance, and I do respect that. But the decision we have to make has to be based on the economic reality we are in and not the economic reality we wish for. We can't let emotion cloud the cold, hard facts. The contract tonight is open and the scope of the RAF has actually not yet been finalised. The advice is we're not actually paying for the project manager, and given that there's no formal cash consideration, I question how this can be deemed a traditional contract in the traditional sense of the word, because it's different to any type of contract I've seen come before council. Councillors, in summary, I think the risk tonight is a risk that we do not need to take without more clarity. I think spending on a half-funded project needs to stop. I think we need to get more clarity on this, and that the $37 million funding gap which exists in the context of a heated construction market and an inflationary economy is too big a risk. Therefore, with a heavy heart, I'll be voting against the item.
Thank you, Councillor D'Souza. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak in favour of the officer recommendation? Councillor Cridland.
I don't have a heavy heart. In fact, I'm not concerned at all because I've looked at actually what this item is about, and I'm not sure it had much to do with what we've just heard for the last 7 minutes. This item is about appointing a project manager to make sure that we meet our contract with the Commonwealth Government. It's doing what we're required to do so we don't breach our contractual obligations so that we keep our $20 million. That's what it's about. It's not about anything else, and it's important to not confuse issues. And I do know that, you know, if we read the press, we've seen, you know, protests in America. Roe v. Wade has been overturned after 50 years. Well, it seems like abortion is still allowed here because that's what not appointing a project manager is doing. It's trying to
Members of the gallery, please. Councillor Cridland is speaking. Please be respectful.
It's trying to stop a project before we even get to see the details. It's trying to say, let's treat people who give us grant money with contempt. And the question has to be, how could we realistically go to any state government or any federal government department or agency and say, give us money, because when we sign up to the agreement, after you put funds in our bank account, we are going to breach the solemn obligations that we signed up to as a council. And what's the risk, as the Mayor said, of appointing a project manager? It's nil. And what's the certainty if we vote no? Well, it's reputational, it's financial, and it's also stopping, before we've had a proper opportunity to consider it, what might be a wonderful project which we know from the surveys is greatly, well, overwhelmingly wanted by the people who live here. We had questions from someone from Karrawara, for example, tonight. It's what the people want, and if we're not willing to even comply with our contractual obligations to give ourselves an opportunity of looking at this by a back door of breaching our contract, well, I think it's a kind of sad night for the council. So I think it's an easy decision.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the officer recommendation? Councillor Brenda O'Brandis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With regard to this agenda item, we've been advised that there will be no expenditure on the project management contract without the approval of council. And the decision on the project management tender is not a decision on whether to proceed with the RAF. The decision to proceed with the RAF or not will be a future decision of council. The appointment of the project manager comes with conditions, consideration for the services and deliverables upon appointment. The appointment of a project manager undertaking a scope of work without any other requirement, require financial consideration. From inception to date, direct staffing, contractors, materials and supplies with regard to the RAF project have totalled $1.44 million. To date, the project has not obtained financial feasibility, and this is an important aspect before additional works are undertaken, before project managers are appointed. The city has tried for almost 3 years to secure the remaining $40 million with outside interests and has not been successful. As advised tonight, the city is not yet in a discussion with potential investors for the RAF, and state government financial commitments have not yet been achieved. In order to appoint a project manager, a more detailed review of the business case would be required, since the peer review conducted last year has changed significantly in light of inflationary escalations. To commit to a construction management without assurance is not appropriate. The peer review contains and notes restrictions and limitations in providing advice as part of the review. And I would expect that on a project of this scale and size. The decision to appoint a project manager when comprehensive funding arrangements for the project are not in place is financially irresponsible. If financial governance is not exercised, the financial consequences of pursuing a project will require ratepayers to be financially burdened for many years. The RAF project may be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and have a lasting contribution to the community. But this could also bring potential burden to future generations if the financial feasibility is not established. Reputational damage has been discussed as part of this item, and the reputational damage with regard to the appointment of a project manager is not appropriate or feasible with regard to this appointment. The financial risk and consequences of the project and the scale of the primary consideration are not reputational considerations. I appreciate the desire for this project, but consideration needs to be given to the financial governance. We've been advised tonight that we don't know what the budget is, yet the project is confirmed to be $80 million capital construction. I too am disappointed the state did not assist with making this project more financially viable, and we probably wouldn't be having this discussion tonight about the appointment of a project manager. Continuous spending annually until funding is achieved is not a viable option, including the appointment of a project manager, which comes with financial commitments and obligations. Financial certainty is required in order to proceed with further commitments. As noted previously, the appointment of the project manager comes with conditions, consideration for services and deliverables upon appointment. The appointment of the project manager undertaking a scope of work would require considerable financial consideration. The appointment of the project manager does not create a financial commitment and ongoing financial commitments. And for these reasons, I would not be supporting the appointment of a project manager until we can actually have financial viability established on the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. I will take this opportunity to ask a question, and perhaps it's to either Mr Taylor or Mr Bradford. Are there any financial governance issues or financial problems associated with appointing the project manager?
I might ask Mr Taylor to fill in any detail that I missed, but I can't see that there are any. The contract has been structured in a way, if you like, is a condition precedent where the council needs to approve the next stage of the project before there's any financial commitment. That's actually pretty normal for projects to be structured in that way, for contracts to be structured in that way. So we have deliberately designed the tender and the contract to enable council to make a decision when it needs to make a decision about the full viability of the RAF and financial matters, but to also ensure that we meet the obligations of appointing a project manager as required by the federal funding agreement. Is there anything to add?
Thank you. Nothing to add, Mr Taylor? Councillor Brenda Brandis, you've spoken, so that you're asking the question.
Yes, Mr Mayor, it is a question. With regard to the appointment of a project manager and with regard to the scope specifically for this appointment, upon appointment, is there any scope of work that needs to be conducted upon appointment?
Is that Mr Taylor or Mr Bradford? Mr Taylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Brenda Brandis, the original scope of the document did have some preliminary works. However, you'll note in the office recommendation that there is a recommendation for the CEO to liaise and negotiate prior to award with the preferred contractor, which will strike out any preliminary work. So there is no work required to be done prior to any funding decision by council.
Thank you. Councillor Brenda Brandis, a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. So to confirm, as the current agreement stands, there is still scope to undertake work upon appointment until removed.
Mr Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No, there isn't.
Thank you, Mr Taylor. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak for the officer recommendation who hasn't already spoken? No. Oh, Councillor Celadon.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I do have a preamble. Apologies to everyone. I was indisposed last week, but was able to listen to all the deputations and questions live online, which was quite a wonderful experience. It took my mind off the current situation at hand. Consider every email that I received, phone calls, and also some Facebook posts. I hope I haven't upset anyone. Just on this item, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I 100% agree with the questions proposed by Councillor D'Souza, and these and many others, I hope, will be answered in time. I don't think tonight's vote is the time to kill the RAF, as Mayor Milner mentioned. You know, that decision to kill must come with objective, rational, relevant, timely information, independently verified. And we don't have all of this info. And I think to kill it now would be a real abrogation of our responsibility as councillors. So this vote tonight is just one step in this process of good governance, good decision making, and facts. And the facts tonight are clear. The appointment of this project manager tonight carries little risk for the council, as expenditure on the project management contract will be subject to future approval of the RAF. And should council not appoint the project manager, there is a risk that the $20 million will be forfeited, as the city has not met a key milestone. So I will be supporting the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Celadon. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the officer recommendation who hasn't already spoken? Councillor Navard.
Earlier this year, the City of Swan
which already had the finances in place for a modest pool complex, decided against progressing because of escalating costs. This was a courageous decision because of the risk of public blowback. Our business model proposed a $100,000 positive balance. That bothered me because I was new to the project inspection all round, because how reliable was the RAF proposals start to end? My concern is the wisdom of protracting the discussion by pushing forward with the appointment of a project manager. As late as yesterday, and even this evening, councillors have been seeking clarification on what a contractual relationship for the project manager role might look like, and councillors have been told the contract must be confirmed with the identified party in 2 days' time. I do not believe that I would be taking my responsibility as a councillor seriously to accept such an opaque and fragile proposal, or to accept a strategic position that seems to be strongly influenced by the promise of federal funds rather than by the development of a strong strategic plan to produce a coordinated approach to major asset development and services for our residents. And that's why I am voting against the project manager.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. Councillors, is there anyone who hasn't yet spoken who would like to speak either for or against the officer recommendation? Councillor Manolis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And perhaps if you could tell us if you're speaking for or against.
I'm actually speaking against. I've received a number of emails both for and against the appointment of a project manager for the RAF. This has been a difficult decision, but my thoughts are the city has not been able to put in place full and comprehensive financing for the RAF. The existing federal funding is insufficient without an at least equal contribution by the state government, the city, and an equal contribution from other private sources. The city has already expended almost $1.5 million of ratepayers' money. Part of the money expended by the city was to prepare and submit a formal funding proposal to the state government. However, the city has not been able to secure state government funding. The cost of meeting the federal government milestones before constructions will rise, and this is over and above the city's committed contribution of $20 million by the business case. So far, almost $1.5 million has been spent, and there is another $200,000 in next year's proposed 2022-23 budget. It's been stated there will be reputational damage to the city if a project manager is not approved. The greater reputational damage will be by the city continuing with the RAF and signing contracts and having to cancel them if the RAF does not eventuate because of lack of adequate funding. In the current unprecedented economic situation, we have seen building costs rising dramatically, with price rises in both materials and labour. There would have been a contingency built into the original total price of $80 million for the project. However, with the rise in the cost of building materials and labour, is the original costing of $80 million for the RAF project relevant today? The only aquatic centre that I am aware of that is profitable is Coburn Arc, where there is a partnership of local government and an elite sports club, the Dockers, and all others, I believe, run at a loss and usually require subsidising using ratepayers' funds. In my opinion, a decision to vote for the appointment of the project manager when full and comprehensive funding arrangements for the project not in place is not a decision the city should be making. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Manolis. And I guess that does lead me to ask a further question of the administration. Is it required, or is it even usual that all of the funding would be in place before a decision on identifying the project manager be made?
Contrary to what I've just heard in the chamber, no, and the gallery, no, it wouldn't be required. Projects are constructed in multiple ways, and particularly when you're dealing with government, bringing together the federal government, the state government, and the local government requires multiple processes across those tiers of government, and so it is quite normal for projects to come with the funding coming in different tranches at different times, at different stages of development. For example, another project in Fremantle, the state government required it to go to concept design in order to secure the state contribution. So that was a different arrangement in that instance. So it is absolutely not required to have all of the funding at that point.
Thank you. Did you have anything to add to that, Mr Taylor?
Nothing further to add, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillors, is there anyone who hasn't already spoken who wishes to speak either for or against the officer recommendation? Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'm really conflicted on this issue, on this item tonight. I concur with some aspects of what Councillor Russell has said earlier this evening, as with what other councillors have also said. I feel that we are in an unenviable position. I have asked a lot of questions over the course of the past week and done the best due diligence as a councillor I can within my capacity. And I thank the CEO and administration for their time with this. I am still of the view that the RAF project manager appointment, as well as any other contractual arrangements for the RAF project, should be confirmed only after securing a comprehensive funding commitment. That is, by its definition, including or dealing with all or nearly all elements or aspects in relation to funding. And like others, I had hoped we would have received such commitment by the time we got to this point here tonight. So, taking on board everything that I've heard, and as I've said, everything that I have gathered over the course of the past week or so, I reluctantly will have to vote against this item tonight. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Councillors, I think that's probably just about everyone. Did anyone have any questions before I go to winding up? No. All right. Well, there has been a debate and I am going to wind up. Councillors, I've listened pretty carefully to this debate and I would be remiss if I didn't make this observation. Every argument I have heard in support of a no vote tonight does not actually relate to the issue in front of us. I haven't heard a single reason from anyone as to why a no vote is a bad thing or why it exposes this city to additional risk or additional expenditure. Every argument I have heard against the officer recommendation is raising concerns about the viability of the RAF project as a whole. Some of these arguments raise very valid concerns, but we're not being asked to make a decision about the viability of the RAF as a whole. With respect, some people are conflating the issues and not recognising what it is we're being asked to decide tonight. Councillors, please do not conflate the decision before us with a decision about the viability of the RAF project as a whole. This decision is a simple, separate and standalone question of whether we appoint a project manager to comply with the federal government funding agreement. A yes vote does not incur any additional expenditure or any additional risk. If some councillors genuinely want to cancel the RAF project, then let those councillors, as Councillor Russell has already suggested, let those councillors bring a notice of motion on the floor, specifically on the question of whether we cancel the RAF project. That is within the power of those councillors who wish to do that. But please do not conflate this simple, separate and standalone decision before us with the viability of the RAF project as a whole. Councillors, I'm amazed at what I'm hearing here. The decision in front of us is really, really clear. Appointing the project manager does not expose the city to any additional risk. It does not commit the city to any additional expenditure. Not appointing the project manager means that we are knowingly, willfully, and deliberately breaching a condition of the $20 million grant funding agreement from the federal government, when there is no reason whatsoever to do that. If we vote no tonight, this council will forever be known as the council that killed the RAF project. More than that, this council will forever be known as the council that killed the RAF project without even waiting to see what the funding decision by the state government was. I really hope that everyone who is contemplating a no vote tonight appreciates just how upset our community will be by that decision. I've received a lot of emails over the past week from the community urging me to support the officer recommendation. I assume that all of you have received those very same emails. And I hope that any elected member who is thinking about voting no knows what they're going to say to our community, because I do not know how we would defend a no vote. I don't know how we're going to explain it. This decision is simply about complying with the terms and conditions of a $20 million federal funding grant. A yes vote carries no risk to the city, none. I repeat, a yes vote carries no risk to this city. By stark contrast, a no vote has no upside, and it carries every chance of having disastrous consequences for this city. If we vote no, I do not think we will see a state or federal government grant of this size for decades. Councillors, I really hope I've made my point. Sometimes we have difficult decisions before us. There are genuinely two sides to the argument. This is not one of those times. If, when we've got better information, those councillors still wish to vote against the RAF project, do so. Or even after tonight, if any elected member who wants to cancel the RAF project, bring a notice of motion. Let's have the debate on that question. But that's not what we're being asked to decide tonight. Tonight is a really simple question. Do we identify a project manager knowing full well that there's no risk and no expenditure involved in doing so? Please, I ask you all to support the officer recommendation. I'm putting this item to the vote. Please vote wisely. The officer recommendation was lost 4 votes to 5. We now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 10.3.2, proposed modification to condition of planning approval.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, could I ask for a 5-minute adjournment, please?
Yes, you certainly can.
I feel sick. Thank you.
60 seconds, councillors, and then we'll reconvene. Okay, the next item on the agenda is item 10.3.2, proposed modification to condition of planning approval, lots 26 and 25, numbers 15 and 17 Redmond Street, Salter Point. We do have an officer recommendation before us. Does anyone wish to move the officer recommendation? Councillor Cridland, anyone to second? Well, I'll second it. Councillor Cridland, the floor is yours.
This provides for regularisation of something that's been going on. It's not terribly offensive. It provides a short window of 6 months to finish the use of the this place as a showroom, as I recall it. And I don't know. I'm still dealing with display home. Display home. I knew it was something like that. It's such a temporarily limited period that I don't think there's any objection, especially given the lack of any significant numbers of local opposition to it.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. I've got nothing to add in terms of speaking, but I do have a question, and I think it might be to Ms Lummer. We did hear last week a deputation to the effect that the parties involved allegedly might not, have been complying with previous planning conditions. Is that a relevant matter that we can turn our minds to when deciding this issue?
Thank you for the question. No, I mean, this has come about as a retrospective application. However, it has to be decided on its own merits, so those merits are its amenity impact, as we've described in the report, and the conditions of approval which help to control any impact on the neighbourhood. And those are the proper planning considerations.
Thank you. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the officer recommendation? I think Councillor D'Souza.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillors, this item seeks the extension of use for a display for two display homes along Redmond Street and Salter Point. Redmond Street is generally a quiet suburban street with an entirely residential character. Ms Gilliard touched on these points in her eloquent deputation last week. Residents have endured a compromise to this amenity for 3 years while the Salters Landing estate was selling parcels of land. It's come at the expense of residents quiet enjoyment of their street and suburb. Temporary cannot mean forever, and these display homes have been non-compliant for the past 12 months, I understand. These display homes have posed numerous parking and traffic issues, evidenced by the community feedback and consultation. The traffic and parking issues are especially due to the site's proximity to Aquinas. And I know Ms Penny Spicer, who's here tonight, one of the affected residents. And councillors, whatever the outcome, I just hope the city can beef up its compliance and enforcement regime and not rely on citizens like Ms Spicer to have to enforce our city's planning conditions. Even if this was to mean occasional ranger patrols down Salter Point, the residents would welcome this move. I understand Councillor Cridland's point that this is only a 6-month extension, but on balance, I'll be voting to reject the extension.
Thank you. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak in favour of the officer recommendation? Councillor Navard.
the city has indicated that Webb and Brown Neves Coast Homes has a reasonable case for seeking a changed display home opening arrangement until the end of the year. And the city has proposed some adjustments to the conditions that will address concerns of local residents. While my sympathies are with the local residents who have experienced unsanctioned home openings, parking congestion from the developer's prospective clients, and the city ranger being unavailable at the times when parking issues were most trying, I believe that ignoring the city's recommendation would likely escalate the matter, where Webb and Brown Neves Coast Homes would take their case to the State Administrative Tribunal and cost the city further time and money. On these grounds, I'm supporting the city's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. Councillors, is there anyone? Councillor Russell.
Just a question, Mr Mayor, if I may. So I understand under the planning regulations that there's only 3 outcomes for a planning decision, and one of those is approval, one is an approval with conditions, and one is a refusal with reason. So am I correct in that understanding?
Ms Lummer?
That's correct.
So in order for this to be a legal outcome, then I think that a foreshadowed motion needs to be put to council in order to refuse this foreshadowed alternative motion needs to be put in order to refuse this application. Otherwise, am I correct in stating that?
Ms Tucker?
No, the item's been moved and seconded this evening, so that's to approve the officer's recommendation. Council can debate against the item, and it's up to council to disagree with the officer's recommendation and vote against it. It's not the case where you move an alternative motion.
No, but I think my understanding though is that there needs to be a motion to refuse it with reasons under the planning regulations.
Ms Lummer?
Thank you. A decision has to be made. Either a decision of approval, you've given us the options. So if, for example, this officer recommendation was lost, then another decision has to be made by council, because that means that no decision has been made.
That's correct, and hence I come back to my original question in that that would require a foreshadowing of an alternative motion to refuse this item. Am I correct in stating that now?
Ms Tucker?
Councillors can do it that way if they wish.
Thank you. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak either for or against the officer recommendation? Councillor Brenda Abrandis, and perhaps you can tell us if you're speaking for or against.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm speaking against the officer's recommendation. The current arrangement has been offensive to the residents residing adjacent to the display homes. They've been impacted severely by the use, by the hours of accessing those display homes, and also the impact on the street and the parking. This impacts the amenity and the neighbourhood, which is a quiet residential street, and has undergone significant disruption. And some of those disruptions are in the form of the operator operating for a period of time without a licence, the impact on the street, as I've mentioned before, and the cars, the advertising being inappropriately displayed, and appointments to the display homes not adhering to that requirement to be an appointment only. Consideration needs to be given in not supporting this motion in light of non-compliance by the operator with some of the city's policies, including Policy 319. The officer's report is silent on the presence of the permanent significant signage that has been present since inception with regard to the activities. And this is also impacting the residents of a quiet street. Failure has been noted with regard to the non-compliance for policy P308. sign restriction prohibition. And this is important with regard to providing extensions to applications when we've got a history of non-compliance. This application was approved in 2018, and this operation has been in place for quite a while and has caused significant burden to the residents. The display home operator has had sufficient time in order to undertake its activities. If the officer's recommendation is approved, would the operator seek a further extension with regard to this application? For these reasons, I will not be supporting the officer's recommendation for the impact that it does have on the residents and their amenity. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. I will just ask a further question of Ms Lummer. We've heard a lot about prior non-compliance with prior planning approvals. Just to make sure I heard you correctly, is any of that relevant to the decision that's actually before us?
Thank you. No, it's generally not. It's about, as I mentioned before, what's before you is the decision to give an additional 6 months on those conditions, and looking at how that might affect the amenity of the neighbourhood in the next 6 months is what the decision is all about. So it's not about non-compliance in the past.
So am I right in thinking that non-compliance with a prior planning approval, alleged or actual, is not a valid planning consideration for a fresh, even retrospective application of the kind before us right now?
Well, council needs to be satisfied of a couple of things, and firstly that the conditions of planning approval on this approval going forward will resolve any amenity impacts, and that those conditions of planning approval can be enforced. And in that case, that is what council has to consider, not what has happened in the past.
Thank you. Councillor Russell, did you have a question there? No. Okay. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak on this item, either for or against, who has not already spoken? No. Councillor Cridland, if you'd like to wind up, you have the opportunity.
I'm not hoping to wind anyone up. I think people will vote the way they want to vote in respect of this. It's probably not the biggest matter on our agenda tonight, but if this particular officer recommendation does go down, is refused, then it will be incumbent upon those who spoke against it to, as Councillor Russell said, put forward an alternative motion to formally refuse it with reasons. And the reason for that is because they will be the ones who will need to deal with our town planning consultants and attend the SAT when the matter's dealt with, as it inevitably will be.
Ms Tucker, I'm going to ask your advice here because Councillor Cridland has just wound up. I've not yet called the vote. Is there an opportunity for any elected member who is thinking about voting no to foreshadow that motion, or is that opportunity lost?
The opportunity is lost, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Ms Tucker. In that case, I'll simply put the item to the vote. And the officer recommendation has been carried 7 votes to 2. Are we able to put back on the screen who voted? Because I'm conscious that we're live streaming at the moment. All right. So votes in favour were myself, that's Mayor Milner, Councillor Manolis, Councillor Choi, Councillor Navard, Councillor Russell, Councillor Cridland and Councillor Celadon. Against were Councillor Brenda Abrandis and Councillor D'Souza. Thank you, councillors. We now move on to the next item that's been withdrawn for discussion this evening. That is item 10.4.3, adoption of the annual budget 2022-2023. We have an officer recommendation before us. I'm happy to move that officer recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cridland, thank you. All right. I am aware that there's 2 amended motions, but I will speak to the officer recommendation first. So here goes. Councillors, we have a draft 2022-2023 budget before us for decision. It's a carefully crafted plan that has resulted from 5 budget workshops and an enormous amount of work from our finance team. I'm very pleased by this budget, and I hope that this council approves it. But before I speak on the merits of the draft budget, I would like us to take a moment to reflect on what the city has achieved over the last 3 financial years. As many of you are aware, the state government maintains a website called My Council. That website publishes, among other things, a financial health indicator score for every local government in Western Australia. The website defines the financial health indicator, or FHI, as a measurement of a local government's overall financial health. The website also says that an FHI result of 70 or above indicates sound financial health. Councillors, the state government has indicated they intend to review the FHI scoring system, but for the time being, that's how our financial performance is measured, and that's how we've been measured in the past. Councillors, the city scored an FHI of less than 70 in the 2016-2017 financial year, the 2017-2018 financial year, the 2018-2019 financial year, and the 2019-2020 financial year. But in the 2020-2021 financial year, we achieved an FHI of 71. We are presently on track to score an FHI score of 70 this financial year, and the draft budget predicts an FHI score of 71 for the next financial year. We've also managed to rein in our operating expenditure without reducing the services that we provide to our community. In the 5 financial years spanning 1 July 2014 to 30 June 2019, and after excluding underground power costs, the city's operating expenditure increased by an average of $2.6 million each year. And by contrast, the 3 financial years from 1 July 2019 to 30 June 2022, that's 2 days from now, have seen the city's operating expenditure increase by an average of $370,000 each year. So I'll repeat that. The increases in the city's operating expenditure have dropped from an average of $2.6 million per year to an average of $370,000 per year, while maintaining the same service levels for our community. To put it another way, over the last 3 financial years, our operating expenditure has only grown by 1.8%, when Perth CPI has grown by 4.1%. What does that mean? It means we've become more cost efficient as an organisation, and the administration is to be congratulated for the tremendous work they've done in achieving those efficiencies. At the same time, we've delivered, or we're on the cusp of delivering, a range of new projects and facilities to make this city an even better place to work, live and play. Without limitation, we've delivered Minderup, the Collier Park mini golf course, the Black Swan Habitat and Gierdamire Island, the Redmond Stairs, the Manning Laneway, the Hurlingham Playground upgrade, and the Garvey Park upgrade. And councillors, throughout those same 3 financial years, we have not imposed a single rates movement on our ratepayers that exceeded Perth CPI. The increase in Perth CPI for the 3 years ending in March 2021 was 4.1%. The cumulative increase in City of South Perth rates during that same period at the 2019, 2020 and 2021 budgets was 1%. Over the last 3 financial years, we've handed our ratepayers a rates reduction of 3.1% in real terms, while simultaneously improving the city's financial position and making this city a better place to live, work and play. Everyone in this organisation, councillors and administration alike, should be proud of that achievement. But councillors, it's not yet time to be patting ourselves on the back. We still have a lot of work to do. We've improved the city's financial health and we've made the city more cost efficient. We've kept our rates movements at or below Perth CPI. But now we must make proper and responsible provision for the future. We have a very large asset base that requires constant and substantial investment to maintain and renew. In fact, we've got net assets of almost $750 million. That's what we're required to maintain and renew on behalf of our community. That's 5 minutes, councillors. I don't suppose anyone would be kind enough to... Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Manolis, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes. And this is a vote as to whether I can speak for another 5 minutes. Thank you, councillors. I appreciate the indulgence. Councillors, some of you might be aware that from 30 June 2015, our cash reserves decreased every year until the 2020-2021 financial year. We've arrested the decline in our city's cash reserves for now, but we won't be able to make significant and consistent progress in restocking our financial reserves until we start consistently generating operating surpluses. The city's been making operating losses for well over a decade, with the sole exception of the 2014-2015 financial year. That's a year, incidentally, when council, I think, decided on a rate increase of 6.9%, while Perth CPI was 3.1%. I don't say that as a criticism, by the way. There may have been very good reasons for that, but it's the only year that I'm aware of when the city made an operating profit. And these operating profits have been reflected by our operating surplus ratio, which has been below the state government's benchmark every year since the 2015-2016 financial year. What does that mean? It means we're not generating enough operating cash flow to set aside money for capital projects and other purposes. This should change. Councillors, the city staff and the council have done some great work over the last 3 financial years. The challenge for us now is to forge a path towards achieving regular, consistent operating surpluses and replenishing the city's financial reserves. By doing this, we will ensure that we have made responsible provision for renewing public assets as and when they come to the end of their useful lives and safeguarding the amenity of our city for future generations. If we can achieve this, we will have left an economic legacy that we can all be justly proud of. Our finance team has developed a 3-year plan for us to achieve an operating surplus by the 2025-2026 financial year, but the city will only achieve this if council maintains financial discipline and sticks to that plan. Tonight is the first test of our willingness to maintain that financial discipline. Councillors, the prevailing rate of inflation in Perth CPI, is 7.6%. The initial officer recommendation was for a rates increase of 6%. We've been through 5 intensive budget workshops together, more than any other year that I'm aware of. Together, we have managed to get that rate increase down to 4.9%. That's a rates movement that is 2.7% below Perth inflation and 0.2% below national inflation, while still maintaining a sustainable and responsible budget that continues to improve the city's financial position. That's a win-win. Yes, it's a rates movement that is higher than previous years, but this time last year, the prevailing rate of inflation was 1%. This year, it's 7.6%. We can't control inflation, but we can and we should deliver rates relief in real terms over time while continuing to improve the city's financial position and making responsible provision for the future. This budget does exactly that. Councillors, we've been through an extremely thorough preparation process for tonight's budget. We've had 5 budget workshops together, and the executive management team has made themselves available to any and all elected members who have had questions. I would like to commend Mr. Mike Bradford, Mr. Gary Adams, Mr. Arbery Laycott, and the executive management team generally, because they've put in an enormous amount of work into a budget that accommodates a rates movement well under inflation, but which simultaneously continues the ongoing improvement of the city's financial position. The EMT and council have worked through a wide range of options together, and I'm confident that this budget best balances the mix of services and amenity demanded by our community with rates relief in real terms. I would caution all elected members to resist the urge to make any last-minute adjustments. This budget is an excellent budget, and I would hate to see this good work undone because we didn't have time to fully consider the consequences of a seemingly benign last-minute change. By all means, propose any desired changes when we get to the mid-year budget review, but now is not the time. I commend the officer recommendation to you, and I ask you all to support it. Thank you. Councillor Cridland, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a very modest
rate increase, which in real terms is a rate decrease, given that it's less than CPI. And in recent years, that's what we've been doing. We've been increasing our rates or decreasing them in one case, such that they're lower than our expenses have gone up each year. Perhaps that's why we've been running deficits. It is sad that we've had to cut services and maintenance and still are running deficits. This is really the bare minimum if we are going to, in any serious way, suggest to anyone that we are prudent financial managers. And as the Mayor has said, we need to aim to get the city in a far better financial position over the next 3 years than we're in. And I would also hope that we could start providing again the services that we've cut, including some of the maintenance and of parks and so on. Because I think South Perth should be a wonderful place to live in. It should have facilities that people are proud of and amenity that people are jealous of in surrounding areas rather than the other way round. So yes, I commend this budget as well. In another year, you'd go a 4.9% rate increase. My God, that's through the roof until you realise that, yep, we've got inflation of 7.6%. And I guess the reality of that is seen by anyone who goes to the petrol station and fills their car up, which is what the city has to do as well. So we can't just ignore that and go, yep, we'll keep rates low. Well, we can't cut anything more, and we've got to stop just running deficits. And I do commend this, and I also commend us to have some rigour and discipline in the next few out years as well, because we're going to need it.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Now, at this point, I'm conscious that there is an amended motion, two amended motions, in fact, one from Councillor Russell and one from Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillor Russell, did you wish to move your amended motion at this time?
Sure, but would you like to ask if anyone wishes to speak against the item first?
Can do that. You're able to move your amended motion as and when you see fit. I'm happy to ask if anyone wants to speak against the officer recommendation at this time. No.
No. In which case, yes, I'd like to move an amendment, if I may.
If you could read what the amended motion might be, although given the length of the document, perhaps you could mention the paragraphs that are changing and just read out those ones.
Certainly. So I'll go directly to the clauses which I seek to amend. So the first clause is clause Q, and it reads such: the management budget schedules for the financial year ending 30th of June 2023, as set out in the section 3 of the annual budget, be endorsed, inclusive of $50,000 additional expenditure from the park operations expense line item, resulting in a 2022-23 budget expense of $9,064,457. The additional $50,000 expenditure shall be utilised exclusively for the growing and planting of new trees. Clause R shall read: the capital expenditure budget for the financial year ending 30th of June 2023, as set out in section 2, note 4 of the annual budget, be adopted, inclusive of the removal of line item SPF note 2 Cooge Street design of $150,000. And clause S: the reserve fund transfers for the financial year ending 30th June 2023, as set out in section 2, note 7 of the annual budget, be approved, inclusive of 1, the addition of $100,000 transfers into the Riverwall Reserve, resulting in a 2022-23 budget closing balance of $100,000, and 2, the recreational aquatic facilities reserve purpose be: the reserve was established to quarantine grants and city funds received for the recreational aquatic facilities.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Does anyone wish to second Councillor Russell's amended motion? Councillor Saladin. Councillor Russell, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Saladin. So the reasons for change are as follows. It is proposed that the $150,000 budgeted for the SPF node to Coode Street design be redistributed as $50,000 and $100,000 to the park operations and the Riverwall Reserve cost elements respectively as A. The $50,000 will be used exclusively for the planting of 294 new streetscape trees in addition to the 600 new streetscape trees already budgeted for, resulting in 894 new trees for the financial year 2022-23. Over the 2019 to financial year 2021-22 period, a total of approximately 4,150 new streetscape trees were planted. Our urban forest strategy 2018 to 2023 has a 5-year target to plant 7,500 streetscape trees by mid-year 2023, and therefore there is a need of approximately 3,350 new trees for the final financial year 2022-23 period. This target is unfortunately not going to be met, but nevertheless, it is still considered that the proposed additional 294 trees to the 600 trees already budgeted will go some way to offset this shortfall. B. As advised by the City, the foreshore is 33% and 23% in poor and average condition, respectively. It is considered that the river wall east of Coode Street is a major contributor to this poor to average condition, and as a consequence, again, it is my opinion that it attracts an unwarranted operational expenditure to affect maintenance. This expenditure will more than likely accelerate considering its age and the future impacts of rising sea level. It is therefore my opinion that this key infrastructure be prioritised for renewal and upgrade when the opportunity arises, and therefore the river wall reserves needs to be funded on an ongoing basis. The river wall is currently sitting at $0. C. Although a noteworthy element of the foreshore plan, it is my opinion that the Coode Street node is at least an upgraded discretionary item that should only be implemented when the condition of key non-discretionary infrastructure such as the foreshore, drainage and car park surfaces have been improved. Although the proposed Coode Street item is only for design purposes, it is nevertheless considered a significant outgoing that should go towards supporting key infrastructure and urban forest strategy. 2. It is proposed that the use description for the newly created Recreational Aquatic Facility Reserve be amended to also allow for the segregation of City RAF funds rather than being consolidated into the Community Facilities Reserve. This, at least on an annual reporting basis, allows for the community to view the total in and outgoings in a clear-cut manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillor Saladin, did you have anything to say as seconder?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Where we're going to get the $11 million to fix the current situation in our recreational facilities. So that might be a moot point at the moment. But this amendment carefully considered changes and with thorough due diligence performed by Councillor Russell. You know, with apologies to Morrissey, stop me, stop me, stop me. Stop me if you think you've heard this one before. I'm not one to be messing with the budget at this late stage, but look, this amendment has new information brought to my attention with certainly in respect to the urban forest strategy and the targets that have not been met. So I'll be supporting this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Saladin. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against Councillor Russell's amended motion? Councillor D'Souza.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Firstly, yes, I'll be speaking against, but I do agree with the bulk of what's been proposed in Councillor Russell's motion. And the only reason I'll be speaking against is because I believe, having read both motions, including Councillor Brenda Abrandis' proposed amendment, that Councillor Brenda Abrandis' motion captures the bulk of this and then some. So, yes, I'll be voting against this, but that's not to say I don't support the specific items. I just think they're better captured in Councillor Brenda Abrandis' amendment. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor D'Souza. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak in favour of Councillor Russell's amended motion? I'll say a few words, and I'm speaking for it. So, councillors, I'm leery about making last-minute budget adjustments. I approached this very, very cautiously, but I've had a look through it. It seems to me to be about removing a single line item from the Capital Works budget. It's entitled SPF Node 2, Coode Street Design, of $150,000. And of that $150,000, taking $50,000 and applying it to park operations to allow for the planting of more trees so that we get closer to meeting the targets of our urban forest strategy. Well, that's not a bad thing. And the remaining $100,000 would be transferred into our River Wars reserves. Again, that's not by itself a bad thing. I have had the benefit of speaking to the administration about what it means for the removal of that $150,000 on Coode Street detailed design. Under the circumstances, I'm comfortable with it. Councillor D'Souza has foreshadowed Councillor Brenda Abrandis' amended motion. I'm not comfortable with that, and if it gets moved, I'll speak against it. But I'm okay with this one. I can live with this one. I'm prepared to support this one. But I guess I will simply take this opportunity to ask Mr. Taylor, so that everyone's fully informed, what are the consequences of removing the line item SPF Node 2, Coode Street Design? I don't mind if that's Mr. Bradford, Mr. Adams or Mr. Taylor.
I'll have a go, Mr. Mayor, thanks. So the administration implements council decisions. The city adopted the South Perth Foreshore Strategy and Management Plan in 2015. Node 2 was the second priority identified by the community after Node 1, which is Minderup. Consistent with the SPF, the South Perth Foreshore Strategy and Management Plan, community consultation for Node 2 has just finished. The Foreshore Strategy and Management Plan identifies key priorities for Node 2. These include a range of improvements to recreational facilities for families, but also includes renewal of key assets, playground, boat ramp, public toilets. Given that the location of these facilities, we do expect to be able to attract significant external funding to support asset renewal and improvement of infrastructure on this site. Applying for grants is a very competitive business. Almost all grants these days require a project to be in line with adopted council master plans, as well as having proper community engagement processes. The $150,000 in the capital budget was intended to be used for a Node 2 plan that would be suitable for construction. The city would use the prepared design to create more competitive grant applications as funding opportunities arise at federal, state and private sector level, and also to meet community expectations following the engagement process. The consequences of removing the funds at this stage will be that the engagement process if we do restart, we'll have to restart after having a break of not doing anything in detail. The city can continue with not a construction level of plan from operational resources if in the interim, and that would be probably the approach we would follow.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. Councillors, does anyone wish to speak against Councillor Russell's amended motion? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tonight I'll be speaking against Councillor Russell's amendment to the budget. not because the amendments are unworthy. They're actually very good amendments. They do reflect the tree planting required, which is also what I'm considering as part of my motion. And also to the effect that the river walls are in a state of disrepair, and it is incredibly important that we actually do set aside funding, because in the not too distant future we will need to do a lot of work there. We have a zero reserve. I am also very keen to ensure that that does take place. I also foreshadow that should this motion before us not succeed, I've incorporated the narrative wording with regard to the recreational aquatic facilities within my motion as well, in anticipation that if that does succeed or this one succeeds, they both actually carry that same wording. For these reasons, I won't be voting for this amended motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, is there anyone who hasn't already spoken who would like to speak in favour of Councillor Russell's amended motion? No. Is there anyone else who hasn't spoken who wishes to speak against Councillor Russell's amended motion? Councillor Navard.
I actually support all the features of Councillor Russell's proposal here, amendment, but I do think we can push a little bit harder in relation to the rate setting, and therefore I would reject this and propose to vote for a similar amendment that should be forthcoming. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak either for or against Councillor Russell's amended motion who hasn't already spoken? No. Councillor Russell, you have the opportunity to wind up if you'd like to do so.
Not really, Mr. Mayor. I think it's a case of just take it or leave it.
All right, so I'm putting this item to the vote. We're not voting on the substantive budget. We're voting on Councillor Russell's amended motion. So with that, councillors, please cast your votes. And Councillor Russell's amended motion has been lost 4 votes to 5. I am conscious that Councillor Brenda Abrandis has an amended motion before us. And just before I continue with that, so the people who voted in favour of Councillor Russell's amended motion were myself, Councillor Russell, Councillor Cridland and Councillor Sillidan. Those that voted against it were Councillor Brenda Abrandis, Councillor D'Souza, Councillor Manolis, Councillor Choi and Councillor Navard. So I am aware that Councillor Brenda Abrandis has an amended motion. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, do you wish to move that amended motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I do.
And then if you could read what the changes are, and then we'll see about a seconder.
Thank you. So the amendments to the budget proposed by the officer are at 1A, a general rate in the dollar of 8.13386 cents is applied to the gross rental value, GRV, of all rateable property within the city for the year ending 30 June 2023. Item Q, the management budget schedules for the financial year ending 30 June 2023, as set out in section 3 of the annual budget, be endorsed, inclusive of amendments as per table B, amendments, statement of comprehensive income, Roman numeral I, 1, a rate reduction in total rates revenue of $141,022 is reflected in the amended rate in the dollar of 8.13386. Roman numeral 2, $50,000 additional expenditure from the parks operations expense line, resulting in the 2023 budget expense of $9,064,457. The additional $50,000 expenditure shall be utilised exclusively for the growing and planting of new trees. Item R, the capital expenditure budget for the financial year ending 30 June 2023, as set out in section 2, note 4 of the annual budget, be adopted, including amendments reducing capital expenditure by $737,000 as per Table A, capital expenditure amendments. Item S, the reserve fund transfers from for the financial year ending 30th of June 2023, as set out in Section 2, Note 7 of the annual budget, be approved, inclusive of amendments as per Table C, reserve transfers. Roman numeral 1, the addition of $445,978 transfers into the Riverwall Reserve, resulting in a 2022-23 budget closing balance of $445,978. Roman numeral 2, reduced transfers out of the Waste Management Reserve by $100,000, resulting in a 2022-23 budget closing balance of $2,223,204. Roman numeral 3, the Recreational Aquatic Facilities Reserve, Purpose B. The reserve was established to quarantine grants and city funds received for the recreational aquatic facility. They comprise the amendments, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Does anyone wish to second Councillor Brenda Abrandis's amended motion? Councillor D'Souza, Councillor Brenda Abrandis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The reasons for this change are as follows. The proposed 2022-23 budget does not provide for future Riverwall costs or additional contributions to this reserve during the year, and it has a zero balance for the year. Planned upgrades to the Coode Street and Ellen Street Riverwalls will be a significant cost in the near future, and the provision of funds needs to commence now. Previously provided capital cost estimates are based on 2019 amounts, and while significant, these are expected to be further increased due to inflationary pressures. Even with the possibility of grant funding, the city's cost will be significant for this major capital development. Some of the walls are in very poor condition and require more urgent attention. The 2022-23 budget has reduced tree growing and planting facility. The city's nursery has capacity to grow an additional 400 trees for planting commencing in June 2023. The additional funding requested as part of this amendment will ensure an additional 294 trees can be grown and installed. The amended operating cost is important when taking into consideration the loss of many mature street trees in the January 22 summer heat wave. The need to continuously replenish the existing trees as they reach their useful lives, and to ensure an urban canopy for managing the environment's temperature. A 4.5% increase in the rate in the dollar represents a modest increase. This takes into consideration wages growth, which will not approximate this amended increase or the proposed 4.9% increase from 21-22. Cost of living pressures are impacting ratepayers, and this marginal adjustment provides some respite from difficult financial circumstances. Future waste management operational costs are likely to increase for waste disposal, whether this be through the current waste disposal process, waste to energy, or the implementation of a food organics, garden organics recovery strategy, FOGO. This motion reduces the transfer of $100,000 out of the Waste Management Reserve, anticipating future increased operational costs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillor D'Souza, as seconder, did you have anything to say?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll keep my comments brief. I think this amendment shows that council get it's a cost of living crisis. I don't actually support the 4.5% figure outright, but I mean, going down from 4.9 to 4.5 is a relatively modest move. It's on par with what council have done in previous years, and I'm using that as a guiding principle to say I think this represents a compromise. I don't think everyone will be happy with it, but I think this is a practical compromise and a relatively minor a reduction in the rate figure, so I'll be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Sousa. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against Councillor Brenda Abrandis's amended motion? Councillor Russell,
I'd like to ask a question of the city, if I may.
by all means.
With regards to the CCTV trailer, which is being proposed to be taken out of the budget, could the city, I understand that this is not for a, this is to replace an existing CCTV trailer, is that correct?
Mr Adams?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Could you please give me an idea of the condition of the existing trailer?
The existing trailer is no longer operational. It hasn't been operational for some time. Therefore, in order to meet our expectations that are placed on us from the community around public safety and security and being able to, put CCTV in hotspots that are seen as hotspots for antisocial behaviour or crime, then it is quite important to our strategy in that regard.
Thank you. Okay, in which case I'm going to speak against this amending motion. First off, I just want to give some perspective in terms of the reduction in the rate in the dollar. So, I've just done a quick calculation. So we've got $141,000 loss of revenue to the budget. Now, I know this is simplistic and probably not purely accurate, but if I were to equally distribute this over the number of properties, so which is about 17,312, which is subjected to the rate in the dollar, then this equates to a saving to each ratepayer of approximately $8 to $9, so per annum. So perhaps the city ratepayers will see a saving. However, I'm not convinced that it would be the significant respite that they would expect or perhaps promised. So with respect to Councillor Brenda Brandis's intent and his good intention, I believe it would have been better to leave the rate in the dollar as is. The second point, now notwithstanding that I do agree with the principle of increasing the River Wall Reserve and the additional funding for the streetscape trees, I'm having a real problem with some of the items being taken out, and specifically the CCTV trailer. I'm having a real problem with this, and purely for this item, I cannot support a motion where there's a real need for a capital expenditure and it is being removed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. I might ask a few questions at this point. And, I apologise for Council for having quite a few questions, but I only received this amended motion yesterday afternoon. So my first question is, I can see that there's $437,000 being taken out of building capital expenditure in this amended motion. There's a few projects this affects. The first one is the air conditioning replacement program of $50,000. Perhaps my question is to Mr Adams. What consequences will removing, Mr Taylor, what consequences will removing that $50,000 from the draft budget have?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, for the question. The city has an inspection process that identifies the condition of our air conditioners in community facilities. So that the aim is to ensure they don't fail. So you want to replace them before they've reached that stage. That's good asset management. The $50,000 allocation does not satisfy the demand to replace all of the air conditioning that should be replaced, but provides a reasonable replacement program to address the highest priority facilities. The facilities that would be considered for replacement of air conditioning through this funding include the Operations Centre, the Collins Street Centre, the South Perth Bridge Club and the Manning Bowls Club.
So the South Perth Bridge Club and the Manning's Bowls Club would be beneficiaries of this, of the budgeted $50,000, is that correct?
That's correct, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, the second question I've got is there's an entry in here for the funding for the design of a Coode Street foreshore new public toilet, $50,000. What are the consequences of removing that item from the budget?
Mr Mayor, the South Perth Foreshore Strategy Management Plan Node 2 work referred to the above would identify the preferred location for a new public toilet. So the aim of doing a concept plan would identify where things should go with community engagement, and that would assist the toilets to be located. However, the question you are asking is about the toilets themselves. Now, new public toilets at Court Street have been afforded a high priority by the community during the engagement process. I think if you went down there and had a look at the standard of toilet facilities and the number, you'd realise pretty quickly. So the 50,000 is the city contribution for more design work. However, the city's recently, in the last couple of days, been awarded a $150,000 grant from the state government to assist with the design process. And that'll be to build a very contemporary toilet block with changing places facility. The estimated cost is about $650,000, but it would ensure that a well-used area of the park has a contemporary toilet facility.
So that's actually new information, Mr Taylor. I saw that in the draft budget book against the $150,000 allocation for the Node 2 detailed design, there was some grant funding, but from memory I think it was only about $4,321. Are you saying that the Coode Street toilets now have a much larger grant attached to them?
Yeah, that's correct, Mr Mayor. We weren't probably entirely sure if they're coming in this financial year or next financial year. It's a Department of Communities grant. I believe we did notify council that we had submitted something that I think Mr Quigley talked about that at a budget briefing at some stage.
Thank you. The amended motion also contemplates removing funding for the waste recycling office extension. Can you tell me what the consequences of doing that would be?
Mr Mayor, when the recycling centre was built, there was a gatehouse built for an officer to have a boom gate and let people in and out, and I think the organisation soon realised that wasn't a great design idea, because you'd have one staff member or several staff members at the gatehouse, which is miles away from the actual floor. So as an interim measure, some 30 years ago, a short-term accommodation was built, and that's why you call it a donga. We have up to 3 staff members in that facility at certain times, and we don't believe it's adequate for contemporary housing of our staff. It's probably the worst facility for any staff member in the city.
Thank you. I also noticed that there's the removal of $40,000 for the Como Beach multi-swing park playground from the draft budget. This amended motion would remove that. Can you tell me what the consequences of that might be?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I believe we've talked earlier about our asset replacement programs to ensure that our playgrounds are kept up to date and safe. The Como Beach playground is relatively new compared to some of the other ones we have in the city. It's about 15 years old. However, that is in a very extreme location. It's a very large area of fetch, so it gets a lot of wind and salt air from the river. Recent independent assessment identified the playground is at risk of failure at some stage and should be replaced within the next 12 months. So without this funding, and if the playground did suffer a failure, the only option would be to remove the equipment.
And if that equipment did fail within the next 12 months and the equipment had to be removed, what would it take in the future to replace that equipment?
Mr Mayor, we'd depending on when or if it happened in the early part of the financial year, then obviously the city would be seeking a budget review. However, it may mean the playground's out of commission for some time until a sufficient budget's found, perhaps in the next financial year.
Thank you. I see that the amended motion contemplates removing the $50,000 that's allocated for the plant and fleet program. Can you tell us what the consequences of that might be?
Unfortunately, thanks, Mr Mayor. Unfortunately, our plant and fleet program has been delayed by supply chain issues. We've had a lot of cars on order for some up to 12 months. So there's a big part of that budget next year is actually purchasing cars that should have been purchased this year. So I think we've talked earlier about the significant amount. I think it's over $400 that's been carried forward in that account. So those cars obviously will be covered by the budget. However, what it will mean is if we have 50,000 removed, probably up to 2 passenger vehicles will have to be delayed in their replacement. So again, like all assets, we want to sell or replace things at the optimum time where you get the most value for money. So our professional view was that these vehicles should be replaced in the next financial year, but if this occurs, then we would delay them. And that will also potentially create what we call a bow wave, which means the expense pushed back onto a following year, which may mean further ongoing impacts.
Thank you, Mr Taylor. I'll take a break at the moment if anyone else wanted to speak or to ask any questions. I probably do have another couple, but I thought I'd give someone else a go. Councillor Sullivan?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I reserve my right to speak on this item. I just have some questions.
By all means.
So I notice there's a removal, tens of thousands of dollars from the budget from the South Perth Library, furniture, staff work area, customer service desk, Old Mill Education Centre. You know, what kind of impact is that going to have on the city?
Ms Lommer, that's your department, I believe?
Yes, thank you for the question. So nearly 1,000 members of your community visit South Perth Libraries every day. There are about 50 people here tonight, but 1,000 people come in every day to the libraries and sit on the furniture every day. So this small amount in the budget is to update that furniture, which is over 11 years old, because our libraries must be a safe and welcoming space for all of the programs and the benefits that libraries produce for our communities. And I'll just run through a few because maybe some of you don't actually visit the libraries. So we need access, or our communities have access to library materials, collections, services and programs, for example, school holiday programs, English as a second language, young writers awards. They need access to library equipment and spaces, for example, providing safe study spaces for young people who might not have conducive space at home for all sorts of different reasons. It provides access to technology, including computers, internet access and online services. For example, our Job Ready programs, our digital literacy programs. It improves language and literacy skills for babies and toddlers. Rhyme time, if you haven't been to Rhyme Time, you should go. Better beginnings, story times. And we know that the first 5 years of life are crucial in brain development. And social action, so programs for older community members, digital literacy again, book clubs, and all of these sort of things assist in combating loneliness. So the benefit to our community in investing in our libraries is so much greater than the small costs that are in the budget. Moving on to the Old Mill. So one of the things that this money in the budget is for is to add running water to the centre. Can you imagine trying to run events with no running water or a sink? The other changes will increase the seating capacity to better meet the needs for hirers. For example, we've got a Friday night hirer and they've indicated that they'd need more capacity for more people. So those are the sorts of things that will be impacted.
Thank you, Ms Lommer. Councillor Sullivan?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Director Lommer, for that. I also have a question with regards to Heritage House. So Heritage House is home of the Historical Society, the magnificent May Gibbs exhibition. It's a real jewel in the crown in this city. So what is the impact in removing funding to upgrade of the Heritage House lighting, upgrade and minor works?
Ms Lommer?
Thank you. So yes, you've mentioned a couple of the events that we have at Heritage House. But I think more importantly, last year, your community, our community, came to Council to speak about the value of heritage places. And Council went with what they were saying. Council listened about the Dyson Street Church. This funding is to maintain one of Council's own most treasured heritage places. And again, it's a small amount to allocate to keep this place appropriately maintained.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sullivan, any other questions, or was that?
No further questions for the time being, thanks.
All right. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak in favour of Councillor Brenda Abrandis' amended motion who has not already spoken? No. Councillor Navard?
I will support a proposal for a rate in the dollar set at 8.13386 applied to the gross rental value of all rateable properties, which I believe will still allow the city to place funds into reserves from the operating budget and provide us with an increase in income to assist us to improve our financial outcomes over the medium term. I have confidence in the city's ability to undertake this based on the careful budgetary measures that have been applied over the last 12 months by our city's finance section. I support a present halt on the city's proposed budget that would begin work on Node 2, Coode Street, and I would support the reinstating of repairs to the river walls along the Swan River east of Coode Street, and an increase in the tree planting efforts proposed for 2022 to 23. It has been disappointing that for approximately 10 years, the city has bumped along achieving close to the bottom acceptable score on the financial health indicator scale. But I believe these budget adjustments are possible based on the fail-safe measures and contingencies that will have already been placed in the city's draft budget. Thank you.
So that was for Councillor Brenda Abrandis' amended motion? Okay, thank you. Councillors, does anyone wish to speak against Councillor Brenda Abrandis' amended motion who hasn't already spoken? Councillor Cridland.
We are in serious trouble. Well, we are at serious risk, rather, of becoming well known in the metropolitan area as the Do Nothing Council. What I've seen in recent years is we have stopped providing entertainment and services to our residents. The wonderful entertainment and services that we used to provide, we don't do it anymore. Australia Day, Anzac Day, Remembrance Day. Gee whiz, I can remember when we used to provide wonderful services. And we've also greatly reduced our maintenance. The number of additional complaints I get about the standard of our parks. And we can only run down the city so much when we keep having rate increases which are less than our expenses are going up. And that is the really simple, basic explanation of why we have a poor financial health indicator. And what we are doing, if we pass this, is we are guaranteeing that continues, but we are further gutting the one remaining thing that we had left, which was a bit of capital expenditure. And what are we going to do? What are we going to do when someone comes up to us and says, well, got a real crime problem around Canning Bridge, as happened to me, and you know, we've got people squatting in houses, can we borrow your mobile CCTV trailer? Well, no, you can't, because we cut it out of the budget and we don't care about your safety and crime in the area. And what happens when someone comes up and says, well, I'd like to, you know, go down to the Como Beach playground and use that? Well, no, sorry, we've closed that. That was after some kid was on it and it fell down, and we didn't replace it even though we were told we should do. And what about the oldies in the South Perth Bridge Club who go, gee whiz, this summer's hot. Wouldn't it be nice to have the really old air conditioners replaced that broke? No, can't do that. Or the people at the Manning Bowls Club, one of the biggest bowls club in the CBD, and very, very successful. No, you can't have air conditioners either. And then we've got the staff. There's so many things that we're cutting out of staff facilities to bring them up to not a good standard, but simply a minimal acceptable standard that you would have for any employee. And we go, no, you can keep working in substandard conditions because that's how we respect you. And if you want to, you're caught short down at Coode Street, no, we're not going to design an acceptable toilet for you. And we're not going to comply with our plans for dealing with Coode Street next, because we've decided we're going to cut that. And look, and I can understand that cut, because I doubt that we would be able to get too many grants in the future now anyway. I just think these particular capital cuts, well, in one way they are consistent with the road that we've been going, but it's a road we should turn around, because it is not taking South Perth to where we should be going. We should be proud of South Perth as a wonderful place to live, not embarrassed by the standard of its facilities. What happens when a little kid comes up to me and says, well, gee whiz, I'd like to go for a swim? No, sonny, you're not going to have a pool. What about they want to play volleyball? No, sorry, you're not going to have a volleyball court. What about basketball or climbing a wall? No, you're not going to have that. What about the golfers who want a new clubhouse? No, you're not going to have that. You're not going to have the playground. But your parents might save $1.40 a week on their rates. Well, it all adds up, and we are in the place we are because of the decisions we've taken for the last few years. Let's not go to a worse place. Let's make South Perth...
That's 5 minutes, Councillor Cridland, but I will move a motion that you be given another 5.
I'll finish. Let's make South Perth something we can be proud of. Let's not make these cuts. Let's have a realistic rate set for next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak in favour of Councillor Brenda Brandis's amended motion who hasn't already spoken? Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Firstly, I want to commend Councillor Brenda Brandis's efforts with his amended motion. It's not something I could have done. What I am good at is asking questions and seeking clarification on matters, which I feel satisfied I did at the agenda briefing last week, including seeking some extra savings somewhere in the management budget. If Councillor Brenda Brandis has found such savings, then whilst at the same time funding other areas of need, such as river walls and tree plantings, and minimising service delivery to the community, then good, and I'm supportive. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. I'm going to speak against the amended motion. Councillors, this amended motion was provided to us late on Monday afternoon. We've been given 1 day to consider a series of very significant changes to a budget that we have collectively spent months crafting. We've not been given nearly enough time to consider what is being proposed here and what the consequences are. I'm honestly not sure everyone here has had an opportunity to get across the detail. We certainly haven't had time to discuss it. If there are any councillors who have not had an opportunity to read, understand and digest this amended motion, that ought to be grounds for a no vote all by itself. In the very limited time that we've been given to consider this amended motion, I've read through it and I've tried to understand what is being proposed. I don't have enough time to go through everything, but these are some of the things that I can see. I can see that this amended motion would remove $637,000 in capital renewal from the budget. I can see that this amended motion would remove the $50,000 allocated to new public toilets at the Coode Street foreshore. I don't know if anyone's used those public toilets, but they're in dire need of replacing, and our community has told us point blank that these toilets need to be replaced. It's required. I can see that this amended motion would remove $50,000 allocated to air conditioning replacement works. And we've just heard that the sites with the most urgent air conditioning needs are the Bridge Club in Barker Avenue, Como, which incidentally has 500 members, and the Manning Bowls Club, which is one of the largest bowls clubs in the state. I can see that this amended motion would remove $40,000 allocated to the children's playground at Como Beach. We've heard that that play equipment is in need of scheduled repair and replacement. If those works can't proceed, there is every chance that the city will have to remove that play equipment sometime over the next financial year, because the play equipment won't be safe for children to play on. I can see that this amended motion would take away $60,000 allocated to the mobile CCTV trailer replacement. Councillors, you may recall that when we conducted community consultation for our strategic community plan, our residents told us that community safety and security was their number one priority. What I can't see in this amended motion is any explanation as to why this expenditure that is required, it's necessary to maintain and renew public assets that our community relies on, is suddenly not needed. What I can't see in this amended motion is any consideration as to what the city should do when any of the affected infrastructure breaks down, stops working, or becomes unsafe. Won't that actually cost us more than if we'd simply attended to regular, sensible, prudent asset maintenance? What I can't see in this amended motion is any explanation as to why all of these items that our administration has expressly told us needs replacement and renewal, won't simply return at the mid-year budget review or next year's budget. And councillors, this is really important, because if these items are going to come back to us at a later date, because the works still need to be done, then these savings aren't really savings at all. None of the $637,000 that's optimistically described in the summary table as capital expenditure savings are actually savings. Councillors, I'm as committed to low rates as any elected member here. I'm proud that we've managed to get our rates movements for the last 3 financial years to Perth CPI or below without impacting service delivery. Over the last 3 financial years, we've saved the average ratepayer $56.08 per annum by increasing rates by a cumulative total of 1% over 3 years, while Perth CPI has increased by a total of 4.1% over the same period. The officer recommendation, that's the 4.9%, will save our ratepayers an average of $48.84 next year by going with a rates movement of 4.9% as compared to Perth CPI, which is 7.6%. So if we go with the officer recommendation tonight, we'll have reduced the average rates bill by $104.92 over 4 financial years. Yes, I have checked that with the administration, as compared to Perth CPI over the same period. The point I am trying to make, councillors, is that we are already handing our ratepayers significant savings in real terms. That's 5 minutes. Would someone please move a motion? Councillor Cridland and seconded by Councillor D'Souza. Councillors, please cast your votes. And that was unanimous. Thank you for the indulgence, councillors. So like I was saying, we're significantly handing our ratepayers real savings in real terms. But most importantly, councillors, we will have done it while simultaneously improving the city's financial position and without impacting on service delivery. That's something to be proud of. But this amended motion, by contrast, would only save ratepayers $7.23 next year. That's the best case scenario. In reality, almost all of that amount will necessarily have to be clawed back the following year. Maybe more if the underlying infrastructure fails and we're forced to make emergency repairs. Councillors, skimping on necessary maintenance and renewal is not a saving. It's definitely not responsible. At best, it's taking expenditure that we should be undertaking next financial year and dumping that same expenditure into the following financial year. That is not a saving. That is just kicking the can down the road. More than that, the administration is telling us that these works need to be undertaken now. No one in this room has presented any evidence that these works do not need to be undertaken now. I've asked a number of questions earlier. in an attempt to find out what the likely consequences of these proposed cuts is going to be. And I also thank Councillor Celadon for his questions, and Councillor Russell for that matter. If we don't attend to these works now, we run the risk that various items of infrastructure will fail at some point during the next financial year. That is going to cost us more to fix than if we'd simply attended to regular and sensible asset maintenance. There will also be a direct impact on our community if our infrastructure fails. And let's just fire a couple of hypotheticals out there. Who among us is going to want to tell parents and children that the reason the Como Beach Playground play equipment was removed is because council cut the $40,000 needed to ensure that the play equipment remains safe? Who here wants to tell the 500 members of the South Perth Bridge Club that the reason the club's air conditioning failed during the height of summer was because council cut the air conditioning replacement budget? Or for that matter, the members of the Manning Bowls Club? Councillor, these are the questions we're going to end up being asked, and it won't take long before someone goes and checks the minutes of this very meeting to see how each of us voted. This amended motion proposes cutting operating revenue, but as far as I can tell, it doesn't identify how any savings in operational expenditure could be achieved. This amended motion will increase, not reduce, our operating deficit. It will worsen our operating surplus ratio. It will worsen our financial health indicator. This amended motion, I'm sorry to say it, but it's irresponsible. This amended motion worsens the city's financial sustainability. All of the so-called savings in this amended motion, as far as I can see, are just kicking the expenditure can down the road for a future council to deal with. It is short-sighted, it is misconceived, and it will simply make next year's budget a more difficult proposition. If we pass this amended motion, we will regret it. This time next year, or likely even sooner than that. Councillors, I will not support this amended motion, and neither should you. I urge you all to vote no to this amended motion. And with that, is there anyone who would like to speak either for or against Councillor Brenda Abrandis' amended motion who hasn't already spoken? Councillor Celadon, and perhaps if you can tell us if you're speaking for or against.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'll be speaking against this amended motion. Boils down to just a couple of things, just to reiterate, stripping out important capital expenditure to give residents a one-off $8 discount on their rates is all we're doing here. One really concerning thing, and Councillor Troy referred to it, how did Councillor Brenda Abrandis come up with this? Because I could never do it. Well, I'll tell you how he did it. It starts with poor governance and poor process, and then somehow comes up with these seemingly random cuts to the capital expenditure, which is all that's doing is just pushing the problem down the road.
Councillor Celadon, I hate to interrupt there, but did you mean to say poor governance? I'm just conscious of...
I said poor governance and process.
All right.
Is that okay to say that?
Just, I suppose, be cautious about adverse reflection on another member of council.
But with regards to this decision?
If that's what you mean to say, if you're talking about this decision specifically.
Well, I'd like to know. Yeah, I'd like to know how we came up with this decision of these seemingly random cuts.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's the crux of the matter, because we've worked on this budget for 6 months or more. We've taken significant time, to really understand the will of this council, which is to reduce expenditure and also to reduce or to keep rates lower than inflation. And we've done that. We've done an outstanding job. And I was coming here tonight to actually pat the backs of everyone, the CEO, the directors, the administration, and especially the councillors, because we've worked to this point where in a few years' time we're going to have a surplus. Now, if you want to give a modest cut from 4.9 to 4.5 in the rates, well then let's have that discussion. Let's have that discussion, together, not just at the last minute, throw darts at a dartboard and pull stuff out, which is going to cost us in the end. I'm just cannot understand, and it is, as a council, a gross abrogation, once again, of our responsibilities. And I'll be voting against this motion. I'll certainly be voting against the budget if this motion is passed.
Thank you, Councillor Saladin. Councillors, is there anyone else who wishes to speak either for or against Councillor Brenda Brandis's amended motion? No. Councillor Brenda Brandis, you now have the opportunity to wind up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The proposed 22-23 budget with a 4.9% rate increase in the dollar results in $41.1 million total rates revenue. An additional $2.22 million from 21-22. This represents a 5.7% increase in gross rates revenue next year. 5.7% increase in gross rates revenue. The increase in the rate in the dollar at 4.5% reflects inflationary increasing costs of operations and capital acquisitions due to events beyond our control. Inflationary pressure as a result of the war in Ukraine, with disrupted energy markets and food exports, forcing developing countries to pay for more for important staples. The Australian Wage Price Index increased in the March 22 quarter to 2.4%. Individuals and families are struggling with the cost of living due to inflationary pressures. Wages and salaries growth will not be increasing at the rate of 4.9% or even 4.5% against the rate in the dollar increase. Salaries indexed for 22-23 are likely to average around about 3% or less. And this includes public sector employees. Individual ratepayers earning more than $45,000 per annum pay tax at 33.5% rate in the dollar. Rates paid by ratepayers are in after-tax dollars. That is, the federal income tax is deducted first. As such, 6% is the pre-tax dollars needed to earn in order to pay an after-tax rate of 4.5% to pay the rate in the dollar increase. Continued focus on expenditure synergies resulting in cost savings and also capital life and asset condition needs to continue being reviewed.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councillor Russell.
I'm sorry to have to do this, okay, but Standing Order 10.16, Clause 5 states the right of reply is to be confined to rebutting arguments raised by previous speakers and no new matter to be introduced. That means that, I'm afraid, Councillor, that needs to go to the heart of the points that were raised in refusing this item. Thank you.
Quite right. Objection upheld. Councillor Brenda Brandis, please confine your remarks to the arguments that have been made against your amended motion.
The proposed amendment considers expenditure, which is broadly new undertakings or activities that are not essential, and ensures savings commence for major river wall activity in the near future. Future development of the river walls ensures a safe, usable environment integrated into the habitat, providing education, retreats for birds, passive recreation, water play and picnic areas. Some of the walls are in very poor condition, have visibly deteriorated and are in urgent need of capital works. Climate change contributes to the impacts of the river walls and the natural environment. This motion proposes a saving for a future significant capital project. There is always a choice that needs to be made with any budget as to what the priorities are. My amendment proposes an outcome for priorities, and if you consider the river walls, tree planting and future waste management costs a priority, you would support this amendment. This presents an initial saving, which has another review opportunity through the mid-year review. We aren't moving capital for the sake of a reduction, but we are provisioning for a significant future capital expenditure. The council is definitely not categorised as a doing nothing council. We actually undertake a lot and deliver on a lot, and which is something that I am proud of. This amendment motion is relatively brief and has been summarised succinctly to make this easy
15 seconds, Councillor Brendan-Abrandis.
for those with or without a finance background. The review of this amendment is straightforward, as opposed to reviewing the entire budget. On the basis of prudent financial governance, I present the amendments for the 22-23 budget.
That's time, Councillor Brendan-Abrandis. It can't be extended. Councillors, I'm putting this item to the vote. This is not the substantive budget. This is Councillor Brendan-Abrandis's amended motion. Please cast your votes. The amended motion has passed 5 votes to 4. So voting for Councillor Brendan-Abrandis's amended motion were Councillor Brendan-Abrandis, Councillor D'Souza, Councillor Manolis, Councillor Choi and Councillor Navard. That brings us to the amended substantive motion. So the motion before us now is Councillor Brendan-Abrandis's amended motion. I think that I moved that and Councillor Cridland seconded that. I don't believe anyone else has spoken for or against the now amended budget. So I'm going to ask if anyone else wants to speak against the now amended substantive budget. No. Does anyone else wish to speak in favour? No. In that case, I'll wind up. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed, councillors. I'm very disappointed. The council needs to pass a budget. I'm very tempted to vote against this one, but council needs a budget. There isn't any other alternative budget in front of us. I guess I'd better support it. I'm putting it to the vote. And the amended substantive budget has passed 6 votes to 3. Those who voted in favour of it were Councillor Brendan-Abrandis, myself, Councillor Manolis, Councillor Choi, Councillor Navard and Councillor Russell. Those who voted against it, Councillor D'Souza, Councillor Celadon and Councillor Cridland. Thank you, councillors. We now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 10.5.2, it's entitled CEO's Performance Review Process and KPI Setting. There's an officer recommendation in front of us, but I am conscious that Mr Bradford has declared a financial interest in this matter, so I'm going to give him an opportunity to exit the chamber. Just bear with us for the time being. All right, so Mr Bradford has now left the chamber. We have an officer recommendation before us. I'm prepared to move that officer recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Celadon, thank you. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the officer I suppose I should speak. The committee has recommended the officer recommendation unanimously. It's sensible. I don't intend to go into the confidential attachments. I don't need to. I'm prepared to support this. Councillor Celadon?
Nothing further to say, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillors, does anyone wish to speak against this? Councillor Russell.
Actually, I've got nothing to say to this because perhaps I'm wrong here, but I went to the confidential attachments and I can't find any confidential attachments.
Ms Tucker, do we know anything about that?
I believe they're in a separate folder on the hub because it's the CEO Performance Review Committee, so it's in a different folder there.
Did you have anything further to say, Councillor Russell?
Well, I guess that puts me in quite a difficult position, doesn't it, really, then? Actually, in which case, I'd like to move a procedural motion then, if I may, to debate to be adjourned to the July OCM to give me an opportunity to review.
Does anyone wish, pardon? Ms Tucker, can you explain that to the council?
Under item 11.1 of the standing orders, it is permissible that the debate to be adjourned on an item. For that procedural motion to pass, though, it needs to have a seconder and then be voted on.
Does anyone wish to, so you're moving a motion that it be deferred? All right. Is there a seconder for that motion? No. The motion has lapsed. In that case, does anyone wish to speak against the officer recommendation? No. Does anyone wish to speak in favour of the officer recommendation? Councillor Russell.
I guess only to clarify my position, therefore, that I'll just be going down what the committee recommended. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak either for or against? No. I've nothing to say by way of winding up. I'll simply put the item to the vote. And that was passed unanimously. Thank you, councillors. So we'll just wait for Mr Bradford to return to the chamber. That concludes item 10 for this evening. Item 11 is applications for a leave of absence. Does anyone have a leave of absence application? Councillor Cridland.
Can I have, please, we're talking about July here, the 23rd of July through to the 31st.
Inclusive?
Yes, please.
All right. Councillors, is anyone else? Councillor Manolis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Could I please have July the 1st to July the 10th inclusive?
July inclusive. Thank you, Councillor Manolis. Anyone else? No. Okay. Then I'm going to call for someone to move a motion that the leave of absence applications received from Councillor Glenn Cridland for the 23rd of July 2022 through to the 31st of July 2022 inclusive, and the request from Councillor Manolis for a leave of absence between 1 July 2022 and 10 July 2022 inclusive be granted. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, seconded by Councillor D'Souza. Councillors, please cast your votes. And that was passed unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We now move on to item 12, which is motions of which previous notice has been given. That's a notice of motion by Councillor Choi that entitled Appointment to the City of South Perth Arts Advisory Group. Councillor Choi, would you like to move your notice, would you like to say what your notice of motion recommendation is and move it, and if, then we'll see about a seconder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. That council appoints the following councillors to the City of South Perth Arts Advisory Group for the period 28th of June 2022 to 21 October 2023. Myself, Councillor Mary Choi, and Councillor Ken Manolis.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? And Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillor Choi, the floor is yours.
I've got nothing to add.
All right. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, anything to say by way of seconder?
Nothing to add, thank you.
Does anyone wish to speak against the notice of motion? No. Oh, Councillor Russell.
not speaking against, just a question, if I may, to the relevant councillors. Now, I wish I had so much time on my hands to go into another committee. So I understand that the PAMG still has an empty seat. The City of South Perth is not represented on that committee, and it's actually quite an important committee. I'm just wondering if the two councillors have considered putting their hands out for that. Thank you.
All right.
Point of order, Mr Mayor, I don't believe that's relevant to the item before us.
I think I'd have to uphold that one. Yes. All right. So, does anyone wish to speak either for or against the motion? Councillor D'Souza.
Look, I'll speak briefly for it in light of what Councillor Russell has said. I don't think that's a fair assessment of the councillors in question. If they have the capacity to do more for the city, it's always a good thing. They've asked pertinent questions around the arts funding recently, so I think it's a good move.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak either for or against? No. Councillor Choi, if you'd like to wind up, you have the opportunity.
I've got nothing to add. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
All right. Councillors, I'm putting this item to the vote. And that was passed unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We now move on to item 13, which is questions from members. Item 13.1 is responses to previous questions from members taken on notice. Responses to questions from members taken on notice at the ordinary council meeting held 24 May 2022 can be found in the appendix of this agenda. Item 13.2 is questions from members. Are there any questions from members this evening? Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a follow on from my question from the May OCM, where the city stated that there are no records indicating that the two pores at Lena Court and Woonan Place have been formally closed. So could the city therefore please confirm that it will be undertaking action to reopen these short pores, and if not, why not? And if the city could give an indication that when it would proceed on this matter. Thank you.
Who should I direct that to? Ms Lummer?
I think I might have to take it on notice, but what I can, I think, say is that the evidence suggests that those public access ways have never been opened. They were never constructed.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Russell.
Just a last question. Is the city intending to keep a tally to the number of people utilising the live audio stream? Out of interest, how many have connected to this OCM and last week's agenda briefing?
Ms Tucker?
Yes, we are keeping records. I believe the agenda briefing we had about 7 people that were tuning in, and this evening there's 5 people logged in listening to tonight's debate.
Thank you.
And to the other part of the question was, are you intending to keep a tally going forward?
Ms Tucker?
Yes, we do keep those records.
Any further questions for the administration tonight, councillors? No. Okay. That brings us to item 14, which is new business of an urgent nature, introduced by decision of the meeting. That's nil. Item 15 was only relevant if we had to close the meeting, which brings us to item 16, which is closure. I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance and participation this evening. I declare the meeting closed at 9:24 p.m. Thank you all and good night.